It is 9 o'clock, I believe. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Well, this is the end of the semester, so I'm excited that you're all in the room to present our findings for the first time. So most of this presentation that I'm going to quickly go over is just for the benefit of the people online, and also because we're recording this, we hope to upload this to YouTube later. This is the culmination of a full semester field school in the program. We were in the Mallows Bay between the 26th of August and the 18th of September of this year. And we're going to be presenting on student work, identifying emergency fleet era shipwrecks from Mallows Bay. Before I start talking about the course, I want to thank everyone who was part of the teaching team. While I'm the person up here speaking today, it was really a group effort and the fantastic teaching team of Dr. Lynn Harris, Jeremy Borelli from the program, Mark Koisenkirchen from Diving Water Safety Office, and Alison Rock, who's a PhD student in Integrated Coastal Sciences program. We couldn't have planned this project without them. So I'd like to really thank them. Okay, and also would like to acknowledge our partners. NOAA's Mallows Bay Potomac River National Marine Sanctuary gave us a lot of support. We really appreciate that. The Maryland Historical Trust, in particular, Dr. Susan Langley, for helping us with our permits. Charles County, Carl Sharp's always there looking out for us. We got a lot of support this project from Dr. Michael Wyman at the US Forest Service Forest Products Lab. And also I'd like to thank the students who you'll be hearing from today. Just briefly, the overview. For those of you that weren't aware, is we were revisiting the site of the Iowa, which is part of Alison Ropp's PhD project. She's finishing up work, a long-term, a 3-year project on the wreck of the Iowa, which is a Ferris type. And we're also working on the North Bend, which is Ian Shoemaker's master's thesis. Well, so while there were the 2 primary sites that we were working. We also were able to undertake side scan and gradiometer survey of the outer edge of wrecks and an area in the burning basin for the purposes of looking for new sites and characterizing the ones that are there. But really today is all about the other part, the last part of this, this educational program, which is that every student was given an opportunity to adopt a wreck. Assignments were made in the field. This is emulating tasks that archaeologists often get. They get if employed archaeologists, if you're working for state government, you might be told there's a site, come and see it. You really have very little chance to do any research, and you have to collect field data expeditiously, and then you have to go back and work out what it is. And sometimes that's going to throw you under the bus, so to speak, because you're not prepared, and you have to then use your archaeological and historical skill sets to pull the evidence together. In this particular case, this is the major assignment for students. You all had to write a major assignment on a wreck that you had adopted, and this is what you're going to present on today. So these were we looked at the work of Donald Shipwrecks back in the 1990s. We reworked some of his drawings in order to look at the types of the ships, and we focused in on the ones that you see here in green, which are unidentified wrecks. These are wrecks that Shipwrecks didn't provide a definitive identification of the type of the ship. So in this particular case, students were given the following tasks. Adopt that wreck and record it. You often only had 1 to 2 days to do that work, and then to make a case primarily for the type based upon archaeological and historical evidence. If possible, propose a short list of potential identities. This is really a secondary goal, and it's not one that's very likely to be achieved. It's not like every student is going to say, this is the wreck of the named example. There was no expectation for a definitive or single vessel identity, because each site is unique with its own research potential to explore. And so you're going to see this in the presentations that we're recording. The goal is to identify the type, maybe identify a name or a short list of names, but also, as I talked to all the students throughout the semester, each wreck had its own problems in research and each had its own potential because of its depth, because of its intactness, because of something like the ecosystem that it represents. And so you'll have a chance to see that presented today in the individual talks. Just very briefly, these were the groupings. This is not the order we're going to follow. Perhaps that would have made more sense. But there's a grouping of 3 in the north part of the sanctuary. Dorian, Don, and Jim will be presenting on those. The second grouping was Nate, Addison, and Armani. These are the ones around the flower pot wrecks. And the last grouping were sort of the dive team sites. This is Corey, Ian, and Evan. They're all grouped this way because of the logistics of working in the field and making sure that everyone was able to engage in research safely with appropriate oversight, especially in this case with diving and safety oversight. So this is the order of business. After this introduction, we're going to actually follow in a different order than those groupings. We're going to follow alphabetically by surname. And every student has 20 minutes, but 15 minutes is a presentation and 5 we'll have some questions. And then we're just going to let each student jump up here independently and present their results as each one concludes. So to conclude, I just want to put in a reminder of some really cool footage that Ian Shoemaker found a couple of days ago to remind us what we're looking at. So we'll take you back to a real broadcast in 1931 of the burning of the fleet.
Hi, I'm Madison Costa, and welcome to my presentation on Mallows Bay Site 18, Vessel Assessment and Design Identification. So Site 18 is 76 meters long length overall, or 250 feet, and at midship it is 14.5 meters wide, or 47 feet. It is one of the mini wrecks located on the inner shore of Mallows Bay and is located actually sitting up on with the bow resting on the shore. And located down here in the lower y'all's lower left is a hull drawing of the shape of the vessel with a notable rudder post intact on the stern and 2 concrete frames on the bow. More on that later. And just real quick, if you look real close, you can actually see the shadow of the intact vertical rudder post standing up still after all these years. So Site 18 is not in its original location, as indicated by Donald Shamet. It was moved there sometime between 1952 and 1986. Currently, the vessel is partially submerged in 1.2 to 1.5 meters of water, with the hull standing out of the water by roughly 20 centimeters. Now, this has not impeded interior water flow inside the vessel, as an interior lagoon has formed inside of the hull. And with the water flowing in, it's a very mild current, but there is enough for debris to get moved into the wreck site. And over time, the multiple fasteners sticking up in the wreck have accumulated this debris, which after about 100 years, this has turned into a layer of quite fertile soils. And the soils have successfully buried basically all of the interior structures along the interior hull of the wreck. And the soil depth was determined to be at least 20 centimeters in some areas, exceeding that in others. And this soil had helped form a rich biomat, which supported a very dense growth of natural and invasive flora. And it was so dense that the interior of the vessel was untraversable. And so this made it to where we couldn't actually get inside the wreck to look at any of the features. And so this was, funnily enough, a feature of this site that Donald Shamet encountered back when he was doing his original assessment, that he noted that he was unable to traverse the interior of the vessel as well. And I pulled these images from his original report to kind of show that this site has long since been a dense tangle. Now, speaking on the flora of Site 18, there are tons of species growing on here. We've got multiple eastern red cedar trees growing, accompanied with lots of mallow flowers, specifically rose mallow and seashore mallow. And then in between all of this, specifically around midship, we have pickerel weed and green arrow arum speckled all throughout. And because of the very mild current in the area, the water on port and starboard of the vessel site is very stagnant. And so it's supporting a lot of hydrilla, specifically the coontail variant, which is growing prolifically throughout the Mallows Bay area. And we were actually having to move it by like armfuls as we're going through, and it didn't smell very good either. So that was quite enjoyable. And then all along the shore of Mallows Bay, where the bow of Site 18 was, there were American elm trees growing there. So it was very, very pretty site. Now, although we were lucky enough to not encounter any critters while we were investigating the site, there was ample evidence of them everywhere. Primarily, we found scat or animal droppings, and those were identified to be of the American beaver and the raccoon. And we also found a myriad of fish bones kind of spread around the wreck, specifically cattail or catfish heads were on the wreck as well. They were probably feasting on them. So Mallows Bay has seen multiple waves of salvage throughout the years, and Site 18 has clear evidence of salvage attempts being undertaken on this vessel. And so Mallows Bay has seen 3 waves of what I like to call official or legal salvage. The first wave occurred in 1931, the second during World War II from 42 to 45, and then the third rather sporadically throughout the 1960s. But while this is happening, there's consistently illegal and illicit salvage activity happening, which has kind of rendered it impossible to tell which salvage evidence is from which period of these projects. And first and foremost, we had a very large 4-inch diameter steel cable on the bow, which Cement actually indicates in his 98 report that he speculates this cable may be holding the vessel to the shoreline there. In addition, at the bow, we have a remnant of a concrete frame. Then there is a stanchion, as we can see, indented in it that has clearly been removed, whether it was wood or iron at one point. There's no way of knowing. And there's some animal scat on the concrete frame. And as well, there was cross strapping that had been pried away from the hull with clear oxyacetylene torch cuts on the ends of it. And this was interesting, as I didn't observe this particular feature to be very common among the other wrecks, specifically the pulled out cross strapping. And although most of the wreck was pretty successfully buried by the soils, there were select areas that we were able to get outer hull planking and paired framing measurements. And likely this area was cut out maybe from animal activity or erosion. But this is where we were able to get our paired framing measurements at midship on the starboard side. And this came out to 61 to 66 centimeters, which comes out to a 12 by 12 mill run, which is pretty standard to find with the lumber types being used in these constructions. And in addition, most of the paired frames had been entirely eroded away with absolutely nothing left standing, except for this one area. And this was the only place like it on the entire vessel. And we think that this is the eroded and sad remnants of what was once a very mighty frame. And so the Site 18's rudder post was in remarkable condition, and it was still intact after 100 years of sitting in the bay. And although the water was too murky for us to get a really good photograph of it, aft facing away from the vessel off of the rudder post, there was a very large metal iron gudgeon below the waterline. And I've attached a schematic drawing to show you where the gudgeon would have been
or where the gudgeon is currently in relation to the current water level. And you can see me in the photographs to the left and right. My shoulder is where the water level is now. And at one point in time, there would have been another gudgeon where my hand is. And if you follow vertical up the rudder post, where it cinches in a little bit, it's possible that that would have been the site of another gudgeon in the past as well. And no real way of knowing what happened to those gudgeons. They could have been salvaged, as it's a solid hunk of metal, it'd be prime salvage, or they could have just fallen off. Now, the Site 18's bow assembly was in incredible condition, and we were able to observe a metal keel shoe poking up from the stem gripe underneath the vessel, and a single outer hull plank was observed being attached to the starboard side of the hull remains, still fastened in with its original fastenings. And directly behind the outer hull planking, the apron and deadwood of the bow also remained in place. And I've labeled it here for those of you that are not super savvy on your ship construction. And this was a really fun kind of ooh and ah moment as we're walking up doing the vessel assessment. I don't think any of us expected this bow assembly to be in such good condition. And sticking to that theme, coming around on the port side, we actually noticed four exterior or outer hull planking still attached to the vessel. The fourth is actually just below this image here. And in addition, between the seams of the planking, the original oakum caulking was still in place. And oakum is a type of waterproofing caulking material that's made from plant fibers that are usually hemp soaked in tar to create a really sticky glue. And you can also observe white lead putty and red paint flecks, both of which would have been lead-based, more waterproofing and weathering techniques to try and preserve the hull. And I mean, it's been over a century, right? And this has just been sitting away, weathering. And the bow is in the best condition on the entire site. So without a doubt, these preservative methods clearly work. And what we initially thought were trundle heads fastened to the outer hull planks were actually found to be protective wooden caps, kind of like a jigsaw, designed to fit over the iron fastening to protect them from weathering. On the interior of these wooden caps, there was red paint, likely also lead-based, as yet another waterproofing method to try and preserve the material as long as possible. And while this design feature had been written about in the historical record, this was the very first time that ECU archaeologists had observed it. And so this was a real special treat for all of us. That was pretty awesome. So vessel type identification. So thankfully, the two most diagnostic portions of the vessel, the bow and the stern, were in the best condition for me. So I was able to successfully match out the rudder assembly and rudder post to Site 18 to the Ferris schematics of a rudder assembly for Ferris vessels in Curtis 1919. Specifically, while the rabbet fillers, arch knees, reinforcement strap, and deadwood all along the upper assembly are gone, the lower assembly is still remaining perfectly intact, with the double steel knee and the steel side plate on either side of the keel fastened in, holding the rudder post upright. In addition to matching out the rudder type specifications to Ferris type designs, we are able to match out the fastener pattern observed on the port side bow with the Ferris staggered fastener pattern outlined by Davis 1918. And these are done in a staggered way to reduce the stress on the wood to keep it from splitting over time. And again, as we can see, it's only just now starting to split here. And so this works very, very well. And last but not least, we were able to match out the bow almost perfectly to the Ferris bow design from Davis 1918. And there are some minor deviations which are to be expected because we know that at this time, these ships that are being constructed, there are some corners that are being cut and there are some deviations to plan that are happening. But for it to match out as closely as this does is pretty incredible. And I've gone ahead and etched in this red mark where this missing stem timber would have been, just to kind of show representative where it would have been. So
fall 2024 site investigation and assessment has identified Site 18 as being the remains of a Ferris-type wooden steamship. Overall, Site 18 is in very good condition, protected by the soil and vegetation, which thoroughly covers the wreck. After over a century of sitting in the Potomac River, the whole remains of Site 18 have become almost wholly reclaimed by nature and part of the natural landscape. With the sanctuary, with the site designated as a sanctuary, it should be protected in perpetuity now. And last but not least, thank you very, very much to everybody that was involved in helping make this possible. And last but certainly not least, although I was unable to find a historic vessel name for this vessel, I do have a very short list. There are 3 potential vessels that could be: one Hobby, Ceres, or Forester, possibly. Donald Shamet indicates that this site may have been United Army Corps Engineers Site 56, which was found to be a Supple Balin type, which I can definitively say this is not that. So looking at the other Ferris vessels that were in proximity to Site 56, those are one Hobby, Ceres, and Forester. A much greater in-depth study would need to be done to actually nail the name of this site, but I think this is a fairly solid starting place. Thank you very much.
All right, we have time for a few questions.
Yes, sir.
You answered a lot, so some of the bigger ones you definitely covered, but how much soil do you think is actually sediments inside the vessel? Like how far up within the interior?
So that I really would be curious. So I think that we were able to determine with probing that we're looking at about 20 centimeters for the outer hole where we could reach. Inside, probably deeper. I noticed that my wreck had burrow holes along the hull in certain areas, which make me think that there could be some hollow spaces underneath the hulk there that maybe raccoons and beavers have kind of made. That being said, I don't know how deep the soil would have gone. It's pretty clear that the wood that would have made the deck has pretty much disintegrated into kind of a biomaterial, I'll say. So probably quite substantially. I don't believe that wreck is going anywhere anytime soon. Like you could remove that steel cable and it would probably got enough soil weighing it down currently.
Does it look like the sediment is basically, does it look like it's helping to keep the shape of the hull and stabilize it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would argue that absolutely. Because what we're seeing is, with so much floral life growing on the wreck, the roots of all of these plants are also reinforcing the structure of the hull because, it's like a flower pot, the root structure will grow to it. That's what's happening to this as well. So I'm not a biologist by any measure, but likely this is helping preserve the wreck.
If anyone online would like to ask a question, feel free to unmute and ask it. And all right, well, we can move on to the next presentation. Thank you, Anderson.
Thank you.
The next presentation is going to be a recorded presentation. James Fowler is getting married, and we decided not to ruin his wedding.
Mallows Bay seems bigger in person than on a map. So these images barely do justice to the scale of Mallows Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Site 1 is located at the very northern extremity of Mallows Bay, in the northwestern corner of the graveyard. The Site 1 wreck is different from most other wrecks in Mallows Bay, in that it is oriented north-south as opposed to east-west. It is also one of the few wrecks that is, by all intent and purpose, a terrestrial site, not an underwater site, although there are underwater components. The wreck is primarily located on a large sandbar formed by the currents of the Potomac River depositing material inside and along the wreck. You can see that in the square, the red square in the upper right-hand corner. This means that most of the wreck is buried in the sandbar, with only the starboard side exposed facing west into the Potomac. This is a rough mud map I sketched of the site. As you can see, the starboard side is exposed, and the port side is buried in the sand. Earlier archaeological reports indicate that on one point, more of the wreck was exposed, including the engine beds and a large portion of the ceiling planking, all very well preserved, but this has been since buried in sand further. The northern portion of the wreck is perhaps the most degraded region, partially due to the salvage efforts, but also because it experiences the brunt of the wave action. However, the damaged bow section is very useful for observing the ship construction techniques used below the floor, a topic we will come to later. The stern of the wreck is largely intact, with frame pairs extending well into the bay, although, like most wrecks in Mallows Bay, most of the hull above the turn of the bilge is missing. The Huff type are the only class of vessel present at Mallows Bay that exhibit a hard chine. That is, a vessel where sharp angles define the shape of the hull in cross-section. This is in contrast to more standard ship construction methods, which employ curved bilges, like the Ferris-type vessels. On the first analysis of the site, we immediately noticed the hard chine and identified it as a Huff-type vessel. But unlike other Huff-type vessels in Mallows Bay, the Site 1 wreck, with its heavily damaged forward section, allows for a very detailed observation of the construction techniques used below the ceiling timbers. I made this cross-sectional drawing, seen on the left, to document the bolt and fastener patterns present, as well as to locate the filler pieces and frames. This drawing would later help me in the construction of CAD model. To help understand and explain the archaeological evidence, I used AutoCAD Inventor to model a section of hull like what is present on Site 1. In this section, we have 3 double frames with large floor timbers and a triangular filler piece in between each of them. Also included are the twin chine logs, which run the length of the ship at the turn of the bilge. The large triangular timbers are the knees, which helped maintain strength at the joint. The black objects appearing from out behind the exterior hull planking represent the iron strapping present on the wreck. The small black lines that you can see here in the transparent section are all the fastener patterns that I documented while conducting analysis of the site. The iron strapping is very interesting in its own right. Here are some archaeological photos of the strapping from various angles. As we documented the wreck, we realized that the strapping ran all the way under the wreck and terminated on either side at a large perimeter band just above the turn of the bilge. Propagating from the horizontal perimeter band were other straps angled at 45 degrees upward and cut off about a meter above the perimeter band. Additionally, we documented a beveled chine with a single strake running down the center of the angle on the outside of the strapping. You can see that in cross-section in the bottom right. This information was all very exciting to us, as no other above water and easily measurable examples exist of this feature on other Huff-type wrecks in Mallows Bay. Also clearly visible here is the cross-sectional view afforded to us by the destroyed forward portion of the ship. The photograph on the right is taken facing aft, and we can clearly see the chine, the exterior hull planking, the frames, and other important features. What isn't directly visible in these photos is the double chine log. In this picture, the double chine log is readily apparent. These 2 large square timbers ran the length of the vessel right at the intersection of the floor timbers and the frames. The purpose of this timber is to provide localized structural support to this much weaker area of the ship. But usually, Huff-type vessels only have 1 chine log, not 2. As far as we know, this is the only example of a Huff-type vessel that has a double chine log. Whether this was an earlier design iteration, or something added in a retrofit, or a later addition to the plans, is not currently known. The exposed portion of the wreck also offered an unobstructed view of the fastener patterns, which are displayed here. Several different layers of fasteners are present, indicating the process of construction. Larger iron fasteners with peened heads fastened the frames to the chine logs, where threaded bolts fastened the chine logs to the floor timbers. The photograph here on the left is a good indication of the level of preservation found throughout the wreck. The exterior hull planking and the frames below the turn of the bilge are all present, along with some of the floor timbers and filler timbers in various states of preservation. The image on the right is a 3D model indicating what actually remains on the wreck. As you can see, the double chine log, only the bolts remain above that spot. The long diagonal bolts were for holding the knees in place, and the smaller bolts were likely for ceiling planking, though much of that is gone. Most of the vertical frame timbers are also gone, but the iron fasteners that held them in place are still extant, running horizontally from the iron strapping into the chine log. Now on to some site analysis. Considering we are 100% sure the wreck represents a Huff-type vessel, we can consult the list of which Huff-type vessels were deposited at Mallows Bay and use the process of elimination to identify the wreck. As you can see here on the right, there are 3 vessels which Site 1 could represent: the Astoria, the Blandon, and the Boylston. None of those 3 vessels are currently accounted for, although they were documented as being deposited in Mallows Bay. Right off the bat, we can eliminate the Blandon from this list. A 1937 U.S. Army Corps of Engineer map indicates that the Blandon is likely located much farther to the south, close to the present-day wreck of the Accomac. That leaves us with the Astoria and the Boylston. As you can see, the Boylston was beached on July 28, 1929, and the Astoria a few months later on December 21, 1929. This led me to try to identify other ships beached on those dates to reconstruct the beaching sequence and try to lend more insight to that route. I identified 7 documented beaching events which took place throughout the 1920s, indicated on this map in different colors. The Boylston was part of the beaching event indicated here in green, and the Astoria was part of the beaching event indicated here in bright red. The blue events were the very earliest, and the dark red events were the very latest. It seems that as the northern part of the bay filled up, the ships were subsequently beached further south, although some movement seems to have taken place. Considering the Boylston was beached earlier, it is more likely located further north, and the Astoria further south, although there is no way to corroborate this claim using this method alone. Additional analysis of aerial photography may help identify the wreck. These aerial photos from the 1930s were cross-referenced with the Army Corps of Engineers map from the same time that indicated that the Boylston was located in the top left somewhere, likely one of these 2 vessels colored red. The aerial photos seem to corroborate this data, as the profile and relative length of both the red ships seem very close to that of the North Bend, another confirmed Huff-type vessel indicated in yellow. Exactly which ship is Boylston from these aerial photographies is hard to determine, but likely the candidates do indicate that Site 1 wreck is most likely that of the Boylston. With that in mind, here is a bit of information on the Boylston to help add historical context to the archaeological site. This ship pictured is not Boylston itself, but instead Potomac, another Huff-type vessel. However, they would have appeared almost identical. The Boylston was built in the Grant Smith Porter shipyard and was launched on March 14, 1918 for the Emergency Fleet Corporation. At first, the ship was employed on the Pineapple Run between California and Hawaii, transporting coal and other goods in return for Hawaiian products such as sugar and fruit. However, during this tenure, the Boylston and other Huff-type ships experienced an increase in control issues, a problem which resulted in new rudders being retrofitted to most Huff-type vessels. The general seaworthiness of the Huff-type was up for debate, an issue exacerbated by the sinking of the Coos Bay, another Huff-type in heavy weather off Cabo San Lucas only a few days after the ship was commissioned. Issues with the Boylston persisted, including machinery breakdowns, bad caulking, and other structural problems. The ship joined the Triangle Steamship Company and sailed from the west coast to the east coast, and while doing so, managed to rescue and tow another Emergency Fleet Corporation vessel stricken in bad weather. During the ship's time on the east coast, it continued to be problematic. In one fitful voyage, It was laid up in the Canary Islands for several weeks with engine problems, all while a cargo of fruit and raw meat spoiled in the cargo hold. A stinking mess that had to be scraped out with shovels upon arrival at Rotterdam. The writing was on the wall for the Boylston, and the ship conducted only a few voyages on its run up to decommissioning. The ship's papers were handed over on February 15th, 1920, and after sitting idle for a few more years, the ship was dragged to Mallows Bay and unceremoniously scrapped. I believe Site 1 is most likely the Boylston, but hopefully this can be further clarified with additional archival and archaeological research. I wish I could be there in person to receive any questions, but nevertheless, feel free to email me with any comments or any questions. I can be reached at fowlerjam@students.ecu.edu. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello, everyone. I hope all is well. My name is Armani Gibbs, and I am a maritime archaeologist who studies the medical practices of maritime civilizations by analyzing shipwreck records, medicinal texts, and artifacts from different vessels. Today, I'm going to be delving into the ecological significance of Vessel 17. Vessel 17, as it is situated right here, is classified as a merchant steamship vessel and is associated with the United States Shipping Board. It has a length of 257 feet and it has a beam of 46 feet and 6 inches. It is resting on the keel and the bow is on the shore of the north to site number 101, which is situated up in here. The port lies on the side 18 and the starboard side is resting to the bow of 16 right here. Due to dense vegetation, this permitted a very effective survey. However, due to the positioning of the iron fasteners, cross strappings, the keel hub configuration, the wooden hub, and the gudgeon extent, it is deemed as a possible Ferris type ship. This is just another picture of where it is situated in Mallows Bay. So due to the shallow presence of where it lies, there were many artifacts that I didn't think were actually pertaining to the natural wreck itself. There was a lot of debris, different plastic. It was even some shotgun shells from some local hunters nearby. But these artifacts are what actually stood out the most and were prevalent in very interesting areas within the wreck. In the left corner right here, we have a ceramic shard. These ceramic shards were scattered all over the vessels, and these clumps of ceramic shards right here were also found in various places. These this brick fragment, there was many brick fragments within the vessel, but this brick right here was the only one intact that was found. It is labeled Phoenix, even though it doesn't have the whole label, but from another vessel that we were serving, we deemed that the brick name is Phoenix. This is a large iron core, and this iron core is the largest one that was found within the site. There was multiple miniature cores within the site, but nothing of this size. So the ecological significance of the proximity of site 18 CH518, known as Vessel 17, proximity to the shore, is that due to its close presence to the shore, it creates a very shallow environment, which provides a great ecosystem to many maritime, to many marine animals, and it actually serves as an artificial reef, which provides shelter and food for many species. The proximity allows rich biological and it provides a rich biological environment for aquatic and terrestrial organisms to strive. And over time, plants and animals found on a shipwreck will change due to factors like the nutrients cycling, the changing weather conditions, and the competition of different species. So something that I was really trying to figure out was what causes this vegetation buildup within this area. There were many different vessels in Mallows A, but there was nothing, the vegetation did not grow this dense as it did in other areas of Mallows Bay. So what I came to the conclusion is that due to the silt and sand, because in Shamet article, vessel 17 was positioned in a different place that it is now. Due to the movement of the vessel, it seems like it picked up a lot of different debris and organism that may have contributed to the growth of all these different ecological plants. Rocks in the hull. Once these ships and stuff were moved, rocks were placed in the hulls to keep them intact so they wouldn't sway or move within the bay. These rocks inevitably broke down and created a different sedimentation that would originally be in the bay, which contributed to environmental growth. Age wood, due to the type of wood that the vessel had, certain plants they strived off of this wood, causing certain plants to grow in specific areas of the wreck and also caused different plants to deteriorate the wreck based on their constitution within it. Human interactions, we may not think that we do a lot and we contribute a lot to Mallows Bay because it's its own essence, it's its own organism, but human interactions are actually detrimental to the growth and deterioration of these vessels and organisms. While on the site, me and my team collected numerous debris that were scattered all around the wreck. Other than in debris, we also were eating our lunch and stuff during our breaks. What I have noticed is the dispersal of our food and also people passing along the boats and stuff can contribute to these organisms popping up within these vessels with the fluctuating tides pulling these organisms in and out of these specific areas. The biggest one that I think has been the reason for majority of these plants being situated within these vessels is animals dropping their seeds. The proper term for this is known as seed dispersal. During this survey, and these are all real life photos that were found during the wreck, and excluding the raccoons, otters, and beavers, all the rest of these animals were seen within the vicinity or on these wrecks. These animals contribute a lot to the wrecks and the way that these wrecks form due to how they shift the changing due to how they shift the changing makeup of the wreck. Being said, some of these wrecks eat a lot of the organisms. Some of these animals eat a lot of the organisms that are within these wrecks, which creates different species to come and move from these wrecks, which results in the buildup of these different organic materials or the decline of them. In the middle, there is a deer print. This deer print stood out to me because during Shamet's article, he spoke of deers crossing to and from the wrecks. So seeing this deer print stood out to me, knowing that, I read this article from years ago and now I'm seeing the results of it and the truth of it in real time. Inevitably, the natural dispersal system helps introduce new species to the wrecks over time, contributing to a wide variety of biodiversity. Due to these seed droppings and the biodiversity that has accumulated within the wrecks, these are the most prevalent plant species that were found within the site. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because there are a few, but I'm going to state the name and the medicinal uses of each of these plants. So the first one we have is water mint. Water mint can be used for anti-inflammatory issues, a digestive aid, a natural mouthwash, and pain relief. Sneezeweed, it has anti-parasitic properties, is anti-inflammatory, and it also can treat the common cold. Sweet flag has respiratory issue. It helps with respiratory issues, the nervous system, and digestive conditions. The ground cell tree, it is anti-parasitic. Water pennywort, it has numerous of benefits for your body, but the ones that stood out to me the most was it helped with diabetes, it was anti-cancer, antiviral, and antibacterial and fungal. The common persimmon, which stood out to me the most, it was a persimmon tree on the wreck. That was a very fascinating find. It is an antioxidant, relieves constipation, is rich in fiber, and is anti-inflammatory. The swamp rose mallow, known as hibiscus, it relieves inflammation and irritation, treats coughs, treats lung ailments, and it also reduces the pain and swelling from insects. Sweet scent camphor is anti-inflammatory and a digestive aid. Switchgrass is an antioxidant, and switchgrass is very abundant within this wrecks, and it somewhat holds the wreck together because what it does, it goes deep within the wreck, and it's what its roots does, it holds everything together, so it controls erosion. And the most abundant plant that was significant out of all of them was the pickleweed, which is native to this region. Known by the natives of it is called the Potomac weeks, and it's also used as a sort of food. It is said that the leaves could be used in a salad, much like kale, and it has a rich starchy broth, so that also can be eaten. This is just a picture of a baseline that was stretched out from the bow to the stern, and it just shows you how prevalent this prickleweed really is. It extends from the bow all the way to the stern. So, what do plants tell us about shipwrecks? Plants grow on very specific material. So the plants can show you what type of wood is there, what's the condition of the water, and it also can point you to the age of the ship, the depth of which the water rises in these certain areas due to the certain plants that grow, and it can also tell you the salinity of it. Certain plants only grow in fresh water or salt water and even brackish water conditions, and the certain plants that grow in these areas can help you monitor the different gradients of the water. You know, after doing my research, I haven't actually found a name that was noted down, but I think that a great name for this unit should be ECU. Not because of my biased opinions of attending the illustrious East Carolina University, but because this unit is an environmental conservational unit. The shipwrecks provide critical insight to the plant and animal interactions, ecosystem evolution, and the impact of environmental change. Studying wrecks and wrecks of these type can help us understand the broader ecological principles and their application to real-world environmental issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Amadi. Let's throw Amadi some questions.
Yes.
So I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the pickleweed and the traditional food waste that it's involved in. I know that some plants within the bay are protected as part of the sanctuary, and I was wondering if you know whether that falls under that protection and how that would affect the local populations who might be wanting to use that population in their diets. Would they be encouraged to do that, discouraged to do that? How would that?
I think that totally fluctuates with who they speak to within the committee members, because certain committee members have different views. While doing my research, that is one of the plants that is protected, but if it's used for like medicinal purposes and not just purposes for like a snatch and go or just to destroy the population of the plant, I think that they would allow it.
So you talked about all the plants that had like medicinal properties.
Yeah.
Do you know how does a person ingest the plants? Did they like boil them or put them in tea?
Most of these plants have specific uses, so that's a great question. For most of the plants, you can use the limbs, the limbs or the roots, and you can grind them up and make a concoction out of that. Or you can boil some of the leaves and drink it as tea. Some of the plants like the peckerel, on weed. It has a edible bulb at the end, and you can roast it, and it gives it a nutty aromatic flavor. So you can eat them like nuts, or you can mash them up and make it into even granola bars. Yep. Yes.
I had a question about the deer tracks. Why do you think they would come from the coastal areas onto the wreck, and how might they impact the wreck ecosystems?
I believe that I believe that the reason why they come to these wrecks is because it's easier to forage for food. You know, it's a controlled environment. So when they go to these wrecks, they're not like in the whips of dealing with all these other factors of different deers and stuff fighting over food or factors that would prevent them from gaining food. They're very intelligent animals, so they know that coming to these wrecks, they're going to have an easy access to grazing on the shrubs and the foods that they normally do. So I think that's the reason for traveling. Plus, it's probably a stopping ground once they're swimming from different vicinities within the wreck, and they probably just use the wrecks as a place of strong ground, a strong ground. Yes.
I love the take that you had on this. So, we want to identify the site, right? But it's not that the archaeological historical site is not the only identity. So I love that you're looking at the ecological side, because that's the same thing we do. We work really closely with the Piscataway people. Of course, history goes back 12,000 years in that cultural landscape. And walking through the shoreline in the parks, they told me the same things as the units the food they eat there, and the different use of floors. They're super cool. You highlighted so much. But thank you for doing that. But this is a big thing the sanctuary is doing now, is that we're telling both sides of the story. So that's really important, because they're islands of life, right? There's a flower pot wrecks, and we want those things to be cultivated and grown. But just to be clear, though, we don't protect any of the flora and fauna. So it might be the state of Maryland and DNR, but sanctuary is just about the shipwrecks.
Okay.
So, but those things are important to not trample. So that was all.
Thank you. And I was referring to DNR for the protection. Thank you, though.
All right, let's get the next guy up.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Evan Ollinger, and I'm a second-year grad student in Maritime Studies program, here at ECU. So I chose Site 38 because it kind of interested me from the beginning. It's way down there I don't have a picture of it because I think I sent you the wrong copy of my presentation, of course, but it's way down there at the bottom of the pile of ships right next to Accomac. And it was far away from every other vessel. And I like kind of being on my own, so that's part of the reason I chose it. And also, the other reason was because Dr. Richards kind of shot it down at the beginning, and that made me want to choose it even more. His disapproval actually inspired me. Nevertheless, it was pretty tough going once I got out on the site, and I immediately thought, what the hell have I gotten myself into? There's not much to go on with this vessel. There's not much visible above the waterline except for fasteners and some frames and planking, which made it pretty difficult to gather archaeological data. But my idea was kind of luckily I dove on my site a lot later than other people, so I got to see how they did the methodology they used. So I tried to employ that in my project, and it kind of meant dividing people up and into certain groups and going through the measurements we were given and attempting to gather as much data as I possibly could to determine if it was a Ferris or a Huff. One of the main things I used as far as archaeological data to make my claim was that it's a Ferris was because there was no hard shine present really on the on the bilge, which is one of the main identifications of a huff type, and that wasn't present at the site. And Allison Roth, the PhD student, also pointed out amidships that she felt there was a corner of what she thought was a boiler bed, which is another key indicator that it's a ferrous type vessel. And using this relatively pretty slim data for my archaeological assessment, I operated on the fact that it is in fact a ferrous vessel when I attempted to ID which vessels it could be. And I included in my limitations that, you know, my lack of knowledge on ship construction definitely contributed to that, because it's once you get out there, it's really hard to know what's what and what you're really looking at if you don't understand that to the nth degree. I also used photography. We took a couple different pictures of the site, fasteners and whatnot, and my idea was to attempt to use GoPro footage, especially underwater, because at the stern of Site 38, it's all broken up, and it's kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, unique to that vessel, because a lot of other vessels in the bay don't have a broken up stern like Site 38. But once I got down there with the GoPro, I realized that was a horrible idea, because you couldn't really see anything in the videos that was definitive. So really, my historical research was what I tried to use as the substantial part of my claims. And with Allison's suggestion, I used the maps to begin up. I used the maps and the thinking that it is a ferrous vessel to begin to narrow down a list of vessels that it could possibly be. So I took each map and started to kind of track each of this list of vessels, which I've got right here. One's Ceres, which is vessel 19, and that's right here. Coloma is number 20 right here. Bonifay is 23, and that's right here. Neola is right here, 25. LaForge is up here, and Conewago is up here, and then Wannabe right here. So that's kind of the angle I took at it, because, as I said before, the archaeological evidence, there wasn't a whole lot to go on. So I also used a couple different photographs. I attempted to use Google Earth, but it didn't really go back far enough in time to make it really useful. And I looked at multiple photos from this website called Historic Aerials, and attempted to track it this way. The photos were helpful in the fact that they seem to kind of narrow down a distinct timeline when Site 38 arrives alongside Accomac. But in my opinion, they didn't really make any more conclusive than what the maps told me. And my thinking was to use the maps combined with the photographs in order to cross-reference them and to help further bolster my claims. However, in this photo that I'll show you from 1974, there doesn't even appear to be a vessel next to Accomac at that time. So Site 38 still kind of had to be within this big mess of ships. But here's 1929 and 1936, and this is a relatively short time frame. So obviously, you can see not much really changes within the bay. I started out, I actually had Ardinia was another vessel that I think that was like the 9th vessel I had that it could possibly be, but that doesn't even, and by the time 1952 rolls around, that doesn't even, it's gone from the list. So somehow it just disappears. And you'll find that a lot of these vessels, which is incredibly frustrating. So 1943 and 1952 is roughly the same amount of time between the maps, but you can see in 52 a larger amount of the vessels have moved around, and some have completely disappeared. And that's where, when I mentioned Ardinia earlier, it's number 71, and I always lose it, but it's somewhere up in here, and it completely disappears. So moving on to 1952 to our current map, this is obviously the largest amount of time between the maps, and many of the wrecks have pretty much disappeared. And this is where, and in my opinion, Bonifay and Neola it's really hard to imagine that one of them could have potentially moved down here where Site 38 rests today, because they start out all the way up here and they're pretty much landlocked, for a better way to put it. And I just don't understand how they could have, where the hell did they go? So, yeah. So then we move on to the images, and I stuck this image from 1952, which was convenient, right next to the map from 1952. When I put these side by side and compared them, I already began to notice issues, at least in my opinion, because these vessels are all lined up right here, but then they're lined up right here, and then there's one that almost looks like it's on top of one of these 4. But over here, there's no vessel right here. So it's the inaccuracies start to pile up, in my opinion. So moving on, and now I'm comparing images to other images. This one is, the one on the left is from 1963, and I think it must have been frozen or something during the time when they took it, because it looks like it's covered with ice or something like that. So it doesn't really tell us a whole lot. But in 1974, this is when you see Accomack arrive. However, like I said earlier, in the 1974 image, there's no, Site 38 hasn't gotten down here yet, which I thought was interesting. These are from 1980 and 1981, and it seems significant to include these photos that were just a year apart, and they were a couple of the only photos that I could find that were a year apart. However, you can see in 1980 on the left that Accomack's down there, but then you can see the shipwreck. At least in my opinion, that's a shipwreck right next to Accomack. But in 1981, it almost looks like it's moved. If you can bear with me, it's a little, there's a little shading right here, but it's more alongside the port side of Accomack in 1981 compared to 1980. So, which brings me to the story about the hurricane that happened in 1979, where the Coast Guard, Shemet said that the Coast Guard towed Site 38. It floated away during the hurricane, and then Shemet said that the Coast Guard towed it back and tied it with a cable or a rope, or probably a cable, to Accomack. But in 1980, it's supposedly tied up right here. But in 1981, it's moved down here. I included these photos because 1994 was the year I was born. And then 2013 is the year I graduated high school. So they were two great years in my life. So that's why I put them on the page. And then in 94, you can see it's right here. Site 38. And it almost looks like it's back in the same position that it was in 1980. So it's constantly moving around. And that's kind of why, in conclusion, just trust me, because it's inconclusive at best what this vessel actually is. And that's why, if I'll go back to my title slide, because I didn't talk about this, that's why I called it Moving and Grooving. Thanks to Dorian, she gave me the idea for Moving and Grooving. But at 6 hours ago at 3:30 a.m. when I was making this presentation, I was like, you know, what does this vessel remind me of? And for some reason, it just reminded me of the song, The Soulful Strut. And if you've never heard the song Soulful Strut, I would recommend listening to it because I was going to play it when I was presenting up here, but I thought it'd be too distracting.
You can definitely show your interpretive dance.
But Soulful Strut by Young Hope Unlimited. And that's what I call Site 38, Soulful Strut. So to conclude, this project showed me how sometimes when you're put into a site to determine what a vessel is or where it came from, sometimes it's more about the historical research than it is about the archaeological data. And you kind of have to go with what you know. And I quickly figured out during my time on the site that I didn't know a whole lot. So a lot of my research for this to determine where this came from and what it could be was really looking at maps and photographs, which can be kind of frustrating. Comparing the maps and the photographs kind of seemed like a better way to go about ironing out a list of what it could be than just relying on archaeological evidence. And yeah, that's
Yeah, Evan, you're right. I mean, we think it's an advanced type because of the few features. It's definitely not a huff, but all you have left is the historical research after that. And I think you did the right thing by looking at the aerial data. And it's a case study, I think, in one of the more difficult ones. And they're all moving and they're all problematic to name. And sometimes, you can only identify a list, perhaps, and then you have to dial in, you have to come up with new ideas to dial down into smaller lists and whittle it down. But when you've got something moving as late as the 1970s and 1980s, and you don't know which ones are going to the burning basin to burn and which ones have been demolished, it really doesn't give you much certainty. So it's interesting how you've shown how embedded these things get and how they're not embedded and they're still moving around. And that's really no surprise, but to show it graphically is that's kind of novel. I think it's the only real case we've got. I think you're the only one in this collection that has the most moved wreck. We know about Benzonia, etc. But the more they move, the more challenges there are, I think, in giving them a name. So, yeah. Any questions for Evan?
Can you go back to the aerials from the 80s?
80 and 81.
Yeah. Do you think you see a stern in them?
Which one?
Either of them? Because it feels like to me, the full shape of the vessel is there, like we see in the rest of them.
Yeah.
And then from our time on your right, we couldn't find the stern.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to see that because I can't tell an 81 if it's still there based on the copyright.
Yeah, I didn't want
I don't know.
to spend money. So you can see when I screen capped it, they were like, hey, this is copyrighted. So I just ignored that.
It's interesting to think if it's chillier in the eighties, then something happened after the eighties. This is really a question mark a comment, but like something happened after the eighties, potentially like
Mhm.
damage your stern.
Or they damaged it when they put it back after the hurricane.
Yeah,
But
but wasn't the
that was in 70, yeah, that was in 79, so.
Yeah, if they've tied it to the wreck, where have they tied it? Because if you tie it in 1980 and you end up with that configuration, and then 81, you've got that configuration, your line's parted or it's loosened or something's happened. And if you've retied it, it's a different place to a different part of Accomac. It would be interesting to look at Accomac to see if there's evidence of it being tied. Or you can see how even Accomac's salvage is probably a little bit altered, and maybe that's been salvaged out of existence, but something's happening there in the story. You know, Shamet's telling the story and there's the truth there, but it's like would be interesting to see where to clarify it further, or maybe there's more nuance in that story.
I think someone who has a thesis in Mallows Bay could probably go up there and maybe dive on it. And maybe he could figure that out.
So you mentioned the GoPro was of little use or photography and this is slow bursts.
Yeah.
I know this was a rapid recon, so that we were trying to use those methods, or you were trying to use those methods. But if you had a few more days and you kind of switch into a new gear, which was, you know, just data collection,
Mhm.
what would you do? Do you think, what could you do? What are the potential methods you might use?
I think just
To capture the,
gathering
how,
more measurements
Yeah.
would be one thing I would go with, but I don't know if that, my problem is I don't know if that would tell me anything more than what I already know regarding the type of the vessel. So it became more of wanting to kind of ID where the vessel could have came from than the type of vessel that it is. If that answers your question.
Really like the fact that you created evidence out of your lack of evidence. It was good that you got put in this situation. So when you have your future endeavors, you know how to handle a situation like that. So you feel me? Even though you was lacking evidence, you created good evidence out of the evidence you didn't have, which is
Yeah,
good, bro.
I appreciate that. And that's something that I discussed in my paper a little bit too, was that it kind of, for me, became a lot about what was not there versus what was there. So that's kind of how I operated.
So first off, I applaud your unique presentation style. This is great. This is the first time I've seen the historic overview of the photographs to show how these things are moving. Right? I mean, that's really fascinating to me. How much something that seems to be so large or burned and sunk would still be shifting around like a game of Tetris. So maybe this is a game question for the group, but what happened to those vessels that were in the center that don't appear to be there anymore?
Mhm.
Like, are they there at the bottom sediment? We just can't see it. I mean, how much did they salvage? Do they move? Like, it's like you said, it's bizarre to have what appear to be landlocked collection gone.
Yeah. I wonder if there's other vessels on top of them as well, just with storm and salvage stuff going on. They may have successfully stripped down a vessel and then instead of taking the time to remove it, they just pull another one up on the shell of, I don't know, pure speculation, but.
Seems like part of a concerted effort, though. I mean, you've got a whole bunch of ships appearing in roughly the same time period in the lower southeast quadrant. So,
And the fact that it moved that much between these two photos, maybe it's not that unreasonable that one of them could have moved that far from the middle of the bay.
actually, if you go back to the ones with the like the yellow highlighted. Image that right there, back a little further.
This is 43 and 52.
Yeah, you were showing that there was one that seemed to be present on there from the historical imagery that was not, over on the shore.
Oh, right, yeah, the photograph that you showed.
Oh,
but you-
yeah.
Yeah, so these yellow, if I understand correctly, these yellow ones are the ones you think are potential candidates? right?
Yes.
And then you rule out the sort of landlocked ones that are, I mean, it's not very likely it's
I
gonna be
don't-
like,
I still included those as possible in my paper, but for this presentation, I didn't, or at least I don't think they're as likely as the other ones on the, near the shore.
or are those, so those ones are still present there or not?
They're not.
They're not, okay, all of those have disappeared. Okay. Understood.
You came to, the professor's gonna really enjoy reading your paper. There was something that was really important you said at the beginning, and that was that there was this guy you said, Dr. Richards, and he said, maybe you shouldn't do that, right? And then you argued with him and he relented. What do you think about that decision? Would you have chosen a different wreck?
You know what? If I could do it all over again, I would do the same damn thing.
All right. All right, well, I think we're at time. Thank you, Evan, and we're gonna have a bit of a break. Welcome back. The next session is 5 presentations, 20 minutes each. Dorian, Ian, Don, Corey, and Nate. So we will start with Dorian's presentation regarding site number unidentified wreck number 4.
Yes. Hello, everyone. As Dr. Richard said, my name is Dorian Record, and I'm excited to be presenting to you this morning on my presentation exploring unidentified wreck site number 4. Okay. Great. Okay. So just to give a little bit of vague introduction to this vessel and seeking out its identity, and essentially what I'm going to conclude today is that this case study exemplifies the difficulty of answering these types of research questions with the limited investigation time and access to primary resources that we had access to. Okay, so I wanted to start by reviewing some aims. You can see on the left here, this is sort of the most updated version of the map that was created by Donald Chomet in 1998, colorized by ECU student Alex Owens in 2024. My site, wreck number 4, is way up there in the northwest corner, circled in red. So I had 3 aims going into this site assessment. The first primarily was to identify the construction type of site number 4. To do this, methods I used included measurement and photographic documentation of wreck features, macroscopic site comparison with known ferrous type vessels, and I also did do some qualitative identification of wood type, which also blends into my secondary aim, which was to identify the vessel name of site 4. To really work towards that aim, my main method was cross-referential analysis of multiple historic interpretations and maps. And finally, my third objective was to identify and interpret the material culture present on Site 4 in hopes that it might reveal something more about its identity or history. All field investigations for this project were conducted on September 10th of this year. So to begin with the first aim of construction type, Site 4 is really sort of distinct among these wrecks that we've explored because the field leaders such as Dr. Richards, who were, more familiar with this site, have even gone so far to say this might be one of the best preserved wrecks in the bay. This is sort of interesting because Donald Chomet in his original interpretation sort of said, I think this is a ferrous type, but I'm not really sure. So he sort of left it unidentified. As far as I can tell, the main reason for that is that it's a little bit of a ways out from shore. And of course, Chomet had so many different wrecks that he was attempting to assess. So this one sort of just got left by the wayside. But that's fine because really we had a great advantage of being able to very easily identify site number 4 as a ferrous type vessel pretty much as soon as we stepped onto the wreck. Because it was so easy to identify, and I'll show a little bit more about that in a second, time constraints really shifted focus to photographing features and cataloging different artifacts that were present on the wreck. But as I'm about to show, this conclusion that site number 4 is a ferrous type is well supported by comparing its structure on a macroscopic level to that of known ferrous type sites such as Iowa and historic plans. So just for, a little bit of exposure to what it looks like, we had some really great visibility and low water levels on this day when we were doing this investigation. Figure 2 up there is a nice paired frame. Figure 3 is the stem post, and figure 4 is the lovely shaft tunnel, which is just really nicely preserved. And I did fall while walking on that, and it hurt very bad. But besides that, it was great. Okay, so this is sort of this figure 5 is sort of a combination of obviously a lot of different things. There's a lot going on here, but to start off, the top image here is taken from Google Earth, an image that was taken on April 30th, 2007. This was selected just because it appeared to have a really low water level and it really showed the sort of features of the wreck very clearly in comparison to other years. So I just wanted to do sort of a broad comparison of the structure of this wreck with AOA and with this site plan, which comes from, I sourced that off of Ellen McKellar's ShipScribe page. So I think that this just really shows that a lot of these major features are lining up perfectly. You can see the 4 bulkheads really clearly, the positioning of the engine bed and boiler beds. It's all lining up very exactly. I mean, down to the shaft tunnel and the little thrust recess, they're in the exact same position. AOA is a really model Ferris type vessel, and so just the immediate similarity and the fortunate good preservation that we had on site number 4 made it honestly really easy to say that this is definitely a Ferris type vessel. To further illustrate that, I've gone ahead and taken a lowered opacity version of that same image and superimposed it. It might be a little too low opacity for the screen, but you can sort of see that, you know, all of those bulkheads are lining up exactly where they should be. Really, the only notable difference is the engine bed, because Allison Rock, who is obviously studying AOA, noted that AOA has a particularly large engine bed. But besides that, site number 4 is really matching up pretty perfectly, even down to the shape of the hull and, I mean, the positioning of the individual frames. So really, it was very conclusive from the beginning. Moving on, I'm going to reach into some more qualitative analysis to sort of aim at the intent of narrowing my site name identification process. So throughout this process, I have wanted to argue that site number 4 is not just a Ferris type vessel, but a Southern Yellow Pine variant Ferris type vessel. So there were 2 main wood types which were used to construct Ferris types, Douglas fir and Southern Yellow Pine being the less common of the 2. So there are some sort of measurement differences between yellow pine and Doug fir vessels. Unfortunately, with the sort of limited time that we had and the focus on other tasks on the wreck, a lot of those measurements, which would have really been definitively, you know, saying, yes, this is yellow pine or yes, this is Doug fir, were not able to be taken with a high degree of confidence. So instead, what I have leaned on is qualitative evidence, including relative wood color and the notable pine smell, which is just sort of noted as we're walking around the site, which has helped narrow the scope of this name identification to yellow pine vessels specifically. So you can see in the top image in this figure, this is Benzonia, which is of course lying on top of Caribou. Benzonia is a Doug fir Ferris type vessel and Caribou is a yellow pine. You can see that the wood color of Benzonia is much more warm and chocolatey brown as opposed to Caribou, which is yellower, paler, and sort of cooler toned. And so just comparing with the 2 bottom photos from features on site number 4, I believe pretty firmly that it is a yellow pine construction. And it's sort of also doubly confirmed by the fact that AOA, which it matches so perfectly, is also a yellow pine construction. So on the basis of this qualitative analysis, I wanted to go ahead and narrow down my ship name identification process. Of course, wood sampling would be needed to really confirm this, and so that would be considered a limitation of this analysis. But moving right along to name identification, this is probably where I spent the bulk of my time in trying to analyze this site. So I wanted to start by reflecting on Chamette's work. Of course, as we know, Mallows Bay is a salvage area. Vessels were constantly being moved in and out of the bay, and as they're getting lighter, they're moving on their own, as we just saw really nicely illustrated in Evan's presentation. And so typically, I think Chamette does a really great job at accounting for these movements over time, but of course, some things are going to slip through the cracks because there's just so many. So as you can see on the left here, this bottom map is sort of half of the 1936 map, where you see what used to be called U-1, unidentified vessel 1, sort of randomly appear where it was not before, pictured in 1929, the previous map. So this lines up perfectly with the location of site number 4 today, so I believe pretty firmly that that's what this vessel is. But my theory moving forward is that trying to seek out unaccounted for or unrecorded vessel movements within the bay could account for the spontaneous appearance of this site in 1936. So I had basically three main hypotheses that came up as I was going through this process. The first was that it could be identified as a southern yellow pine ferrous type vessel whose location was lost to memory between 1929 and 1936. The second was that it was one of 8 vessels which Chamet specifically says are of unknown location within the bay. So I found that in his writing that he said that there are 8 that he knew were there, but he didn't know where they were. So that seemed like it could be a good candidate. And the third hypothesis is that site number 4 could be a ferrous type vessel, which was entirely unknown to Chamet, and he just sort of didn't even know of its existence at all. So I had a lot of roadblocks to any conclusive evidence in any of these hypotheses. The first one I tested, hypothesis 1, by extracting all of the known southern yellow pine ferrous type vessels, which were removed or moved between 1929 and his survey map in 1998. So it might be a little more clear to demonstrate that visually, but basically all of these vessels that have colored stars on either of these maps are present in the initial 1929 map, but later in 1998, they're removed. So this is constrained to 16 southern yellow pine ferrous vessels plus 5 vessels of unspecified wood type, with a total of 21 candidates. This first hypothesis was refuted because although these vessels do move at various times between 1929 and 1998, actually none of them move at any significant difference between 29 and 36, according to these maps. So that's sort of the purpose of this figure here. You can see again in that red circle in the upper left, unidentified vessel 1 spontaneously appears, but all of the corresponding colored stars are the 21 candidate vessels, and they really are only moving little bits. So that really knocks out the idea that any of these vessels that he knows moved between 29 and 98 could have shifted to that location, even besides the fact that they're obviously very far away. So the second hypothesis that I tested was a bit of a quicker one. When looking at N.L. McKellar's complete list of finished EFC vessels, I started searching for the 8 vessels that Chamet listed as known to be in the bay, but not knowing where they are. I was able to find all but one of these 8 vessels, Dira. Dira is the one that I could not find. It is not mentioned in any historic resource that I encountered except Chamet. I don't know what it is or where it came from, so that's something to keep in mind. But regardless, none of the 7 vessels that I actually found listed in McKellar were scrapped after 1929. So it seems sort of unlikely that they would have been moved so long after being scrapped, because pretty much all of these were scrapped between either 1924 or 1925. So moving along, sort of exploring hypothesis 2 is what kind of led me to hypothesis 3, because I noticed that there were a lot of ferrous type vessels, which Chamet didn't mention at all, that were sort of scattered throughout McKellar's works. This is obviously to be expected because Western Marine Salvage was not only depositing ferrous type vessels in Mallows Bay, but I wanted to really go through and utilize another reference, which is that of Huff, who is the grandson of the creator of Huff type vessels. And he actually has a work with an appendix that lists the locations, the depositional locations of all EFC vessels as far as they are known. So essentially what I did was another convoluted cross-referencing process in which I extracted every ferrous type vessel which was bought by Western Marine and Salvage and which was not mentioned by Chamet. I put them into this table, and then I extracted their burn dates from McKellar's work and their location information from Huff's work. Unfortunately, this also was inconclusive. I really thought something might fall through the cracks here. I actually did think that I was going to find something initially when I saw Moss Point, which was burned in 1934. So like really nicely in that interval, but it ended up being located in Texas, obviously very far away. That is probably not it. But yeah, so really none of these look like good candidates because first of all, most of these vessels, Huff doesn't know where they are, and I don't really know how else to go about finding where they might be. And second of all, they're all, I mean, all of the ones that are not in Texas or bought specifically by a different company, which was a disagreement between the 2 authors, they are burned between 1923 and 1925, so long before that interval in which site number 4 is known to appear. So really, the best shortlist that I can kind of produce are the 23 vessels of unknown location that are all of the ones listed in blue at right. But really, this is still unconvincing because they are noted as being burned so much earlier than the deposition of Site 4. So what I've concluded from this long process is that it might actually be impossible to find a good candidate for site number 4's identity using the resources that are widely available to a student like myself. And so, yeah, the process is just very conflated by historic interpretations that are confounding and historic primary source data, which appears to be incomplete. Really, my best guess is that, sometime between 1929 and 1936, this vessel was found somewhere and just dragged there, and somebody didn't write it down. That's really probably what happened, in my opinion. But, maybe with more archival research, it could be sort of parsed out that there's another vessel that has gone missing in the record somehow. I wanted to move on to looking at the material culture. This is something that I just wanted to do because of a personal interest that I have, and I was interested in the idea of looking at the material culture on these wrecks because I don't know how much of it has been done before. Chomet mentions a couple of brick scatters across a few wrecks, which actually contributed to me picking this one, is that he said there was a brick scatter, and I wanted to look at that. So again, this was a very, very limited time constraint, and so this survey was quite non-systematic. I do know that the majority of artifacts were found on the starboard side of the vessel, which is the best preserved portion, near the second and third bulkheads, mainly around the boiler beds. And so we found a total of 24 artifacts, photographed them, and returned them to their original locations. So just to sort of illustrate more clearly, these two stars are sort of the vague regions in which we were pulling up artifacts. They were all, of course, returned properly to their specific location, but just with time and all of the different tasks that were going on, really specific locations, unfortunately, were not able to be recorded for each of the artifacts. But we do have some really nice pictures that have sort of enabled a further investigation into this assemblage. So I've identified 5 different categories of artifacts that are represented on site number 4: iron, ceramic, brick, lead, and quartz artifacts. That's in descending order of frequency. So the most iron and ceramic artifacts, the least lead and quartz artifacts. Iron, ceramic, and bricks are, of course, those that are most easily identifiable within the historic record, and those that sort of produce the most connections regarding the sort of industrial construction of these vessels. But I wanted to highlight these other categories as well before I get into that sort of deeper historic analysis. This is what we have suspected to be a weathered quartz projectile point, which we found, I think Corey found it actually. It was very cool. We were like, oh wow, like, yeah, it's a quartz point. It looks like a quartz point. It's obviously very weathered, but it does have that sort of characteristic shape, so that was pretty neat. Figure 13 here is an unidentified lead artifact. I think this is the only piece of lead that we pulled up. And I'm not sure what it is. I haven't really been able to do any further identification with it, but it was there and it has a hole in it. So that's cool. Okay, so this is just a table just for sort of reference. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But again, this is a description of each of the artifacts that we found and photographed, and just showing that for each of the 5 classes, we have 24 total. And this is how the amounts were split up. So we had 1 quartz artifact, 4 brick artifacts, 9 ceramic, 9 iron, and 1 lead. Okay, so to start discussing our iron artifacts, this was, of course, among the most prevalent artifact type, as you would expect on a shipwreck assemblage. So this is also not surprising because in his spec manuals, Theodore Ferris does instruct that iron fittings be used for many ships' parts, as long as they are in parts of the ships that are far away from compasses, of course. So among the most common artifacts were ship's parts such as pressure valve knobs, you can see in the bottom left right there, and rigging pieces like in the top left. That's pretty cool. It had this like free swinging arm that almost looked like a cable. And then also just common, daily life implements such as this small door or chest hinge that we found. So pretty neat stuff. Brick artifacts. So actually all bricks that we documented from the survey areas of site number 4 bore the engraving Savage Abrasive. Of course, this engraving was not complete on any one brick, but we were able to suss it out from having enough complete parts. And this is the most complete of the 4 bricks that we found. So I did a little bit of research and found that these bricks were actually sourced from Union Mining Company at Mount Savage, Maryland. Sort of an interesting connection of the construction of these vessels with their current location in Maryland that I just thought was kind of cool. Down there is a snapshot of the historic Mount Savage brick mining and production site where they would both mine the clay and produce the bricks.
So yes, the provenience shows that these bricks were of course likely part of the boiler bed construction. So it could be surmised that there might have been a contract between the EFC and Union Mining Company to source these bricks for that important construction feature. Finally, moving into the ceramic artifacts, as usual, these are some of the most definitively identifiable and sort of diagnostic of a specific sort of commercial relationship between the EFC and a different organization. One of the most common things, which Armani mentioned seeing on his rec as well, are these plain white hex tiles, which you can see two really nice big clusters of in the top left corner. I wasn't able to identify these because this was a really common style of tile that was produced during this time period. And there were many different companies that were producing ones of identical dimensions. So those couldn't be identified, but it's still, you know, a pretty cool marker of the time period. What I could identify are these three bar tiles in the middle photo right here. So it's really hard to see because they're wet, and it's very hard to photograph such fine engraving, but actually they all very clearly say Patent Grip Back AET Co. And so by researching that phrase, I was able to find that they were definitely sourced from American Encaustic Tiling Company. I did a little bit of research on this, and this was apparently like the biggest monopoly on tile, like maybe in American history. I think at the time that they were active, they had something like 75% of the market share. So it's not surprising that EFC might have this sort of commercial relationship. But yeah, you can see down here, here's an advertisement from Architects magazine in 1905. We request architects to specify American Encaustic Tiling Company's patent brick anchor back standard quality wall tiles. So, you know, cool period advertisement. I like that kind of stuff. But yeah, so what they actually had patented was that sort of dash circle indentation on the back, which at the time was really helpful for getting it to adhere to walls better than other types of tiles. And so interestingly, I was looking through Ferris's spec manuals again, and I'm pretty certain that I'm able to say that these bar tiles were used in the captain's bathroom. Because these are definitely wall tiles. That's why they had to have that sort of grip back to be able to fix on the wall without falling off. And the only room in which Theodore Ferris calls for the use of wall tiles on Ferris vessels is in the captain's bathroom specifically. So it's sort of interesting. We've been able to see throughout this analysis that material culture was able to eliminate both potential contracts between shipbuilding companies and the furnishing vendors, and also was able to show potential activity areas within the vessel that wouldn't otherwise have been able to identify, such as the captain's room. In conclusion, I really believe that site number 4 is a great example of an unidentified wreck within the bay that has so many different resources that could enhance our understanding of EFC vessels in general. I mean, it's so well preserved. It has so many artifacts on it that could be, you could do so much more research if you spent more time on this. So again, I'd just like to argue that more time and resources to explore these unidentified sites could enhance the understanding of the bay and enhance the understanding of how to best manage its resources. My further recommendations for research onto this site would be to pursue a definitive wood designation and to gain better access to primary source materials in hopes of better getting a site name identification. And I think that a more systematic and thorough artifact survey is really warranted given the cool stuff that we pulled up in just a few hours. So that's what I have. Thank you.
I have a question because we found what 3 different sizes of the hex tile?
Yes.
Did that, like, did having those 3 different sizes help you out at all or no?
I looked at all of them really closely, but there were actually a lot of different companies in the time period. The other one I found was called like Columbine Tile Company or Columbia Tile Company, something like that. But they had the same exact sizes. So sort of when you think about like, I thought about in my hometown, there was this like historic ice cream parlor that had that like decorative tile sort of entry walkway. It's those sort of exact tiles that were really popular at the time. So unfortunately, a lot of different companies were trying to sell them. I mean, American Encaustic did sell them. And so the fact that they had their wall tiles on the ship could, you know, lead to saying that it might have come from them, but they could have gotten it somewhere else. So it's kind of hard to say.
I know you said it wasn't necessarily like systematic, the recording of where you found the artifacts. And I remember the first day when you and I found some artifacts, we took baseline offsets. So did you take any other offsets to like other scatters? Because I guess I was thinking if you knew relatively where they were found on your vessel, we could go to other vessels and say, oh, this is what we expect to find in this part of the ship.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. That sort of wasn't how the day was sort of flowing at that latter half of the day. It was sort of like, oh, here's artifacts, taking pictures, great, put them back before we forget where they come from. And so you're right that when you and I were on there, we were finding some other minor brick scatters, but really they were sort of in the same general location. So I kind of lumped them in with this overall analysis. But yeah, I think that would be definitely a much better way to get a more precise location on each of these. But again, I mean, they were all found within this pretty concentrated boiler bed area. So I think it's a pretty good lead to look for others on other similar sites.
Was the port side of your vessel deeper?
It was. So the starboard side is extremely well preserved. I would say the port side is a little bit more typical of the preservation of the wrecks in the bay. So we didn't really find much over there because it was sort of slipping down a little bit. And obviously you would have the bay washing them out. But yeah, we found pretty much everything that we looked at on the starboard side.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, but I think she kind of answered it, because I'm curious where the wall tiles came from, like in the space.
Yeah.
Because we know where the captain's room and bathroom, whatever it is, from the plans, but like, and I don't off the top of my head remember where that is. But like, if it's in a different place, then like that's a formation process of how did it get there from where it was supposed to be or something. It was kind of interesting.
And that would be interesting to look at more closely. And of course, you know, you do have that it is a maritime site and things are going to be moving around. But I mean, really, the concentration was pretty clear that that's where most of the artifacts were in general. So
in the engine.
In the engine and boiler area, yeah. Yeah.
I think you did a good job of pointing out that, we were looking at some of the past presentations, like where the heck did the ships go? Then the other question is, where do they come from?
Right.
So you did a good job of pointing out that it's so difficult to try to manage it because, if this is nebulous over here and that's nebulous in here, where's the center?
Exactly.
But what would you recommend some of the next things if people did spend more time on this site to start looking?
I mean, I think that really diving into those traits that are super diagnostic of a yellow pine ferrous type versus a Doug fir ferrous type. Again, I feel pretty confident in that designation, but going into it, I didn't know how important that distinction would be. And so I didn't really know to focus on getting those specifically diagnostic measurements. So I think that would be a really great first step for, on site, because if it ends up not being a yellow pine or being a sort of indeterminate wood type, that could actually sort of invalidate a lot of the analyses that I've done, which could open doors in order for it to be perceived as, a different Doug fir ferrous type that I haven't considered yet.
We should move on there. But to clarify that, Dorian and I were looking at some statistics, and one question that Dorian brought up was the shaft log. And the sort of the realization that we had sitting in my office was that the Doug fir logs for the shaft log are a big log drilled through, whereas the southern yellow pine appears to be 4 logs stacked together, and all of them are kind of, their edges are taken out. So even though it's the same dimension, it's completely different. It's completely configured differently. So when we were making our forms to create the diagnostic, we were just taking the numbers, but not really understanding what it meant, because it was the measurement of 4 timbers for the southern yellow pine and 1 timber for the Doug fir. So it's interesting. The more we do this work, the more insight we get, and the more we learn about, to apply that knowledge to the next time we look at these.
Which I think you can actually see. Something like you
Yeah.
can see that split
Sort
log.
of divide.
And I did not.
And on A too, right?
Yeah, it's this log on it.
Yeah.
We are running over time. There was one other thing I
Sorry,
wanted to point
yeah.
out. It was, could you go to the map with the unidentified map? The unidentified,
Oh.
The first one, the unidentified, where the wreck moves.
It's
That one there.
on this one.
There's another thing to throw at you guys. There may or may not be another wreck in this area.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It makes me wonder why Donald Schemetz says that one moved to there. Because maybe that's not that.
That's,
There's an arrow.
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Maybe that is not that. Maybe that's a different wreck than that.
It's in the Army map that happened as well, but I mean, I sort of don't even know like why they would draw that in because it's not like there was anything in that position before. It's like they're saying it moved, but what?
Yeah,
Like,
what-
where did it come from?
What
Yeah,
Shemet's
it's
basis-
like obviously it moved because it just showed up, so.
Well, that's on a map that he traced.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is. I didn't really know the significance of that.
Yeah, I think we need to look more into that. All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so my name is Ian Shoemaker. My site was Site 61, and my kind of theory is that it's a Huff-type vessel. So the overview of what we're going to go through today is I'm going to go through the primary goals, which we've heard many, many times, but I'll go through it again just for fun. Set introductions, methodology, survey, and rapid assessment, and then really just going through the different goals, both with methodology and kind of how I undertook trying to solve those two problems of typology and design identification, as well as vessel name identification and research. And then conclusions, limitations, and maybe some suggestions for future research. So I apologize. I'm going to start at the very beginning of this and say that I, very similar to Evan, as well as potentially maybe some Corey's presentations, were kind of assigned a site and chose a site that is underwater. So there's not as many pretty pictures in this, and it's a little bit more historical background focused. So I apologize for that at the very beginning. But similar to Dorian, I'm going to refer to this site going forward instead of saying that's the MHT number 18CH569 as just Site 61 and keep with Shemet's naming. But again, primary goals set from Dr. Richards is identifying the type, design of the shipwreck, and if possible, identifying and proposing a list of potential names of ships that could correspond to the recording fault. Okay, so just running through methodology here very quickly before I go into site introduction. So Site 61 was documented over the course of 2 days. So September 13th and it should be September 15th, not the 25th of 2024. So the site was documented using traditional recording techniques and performers created for the ECU Fall Field School. These performers had key diagnostic information, which helped narrow down both typology as well as the diagnostic features that we should be gathering as students. So what are these traditional recording techniques? These recording techniques are just using things that we typically use in the field and we're using over the course of the field school. So these include just basic items like a 30-meter tape measure, rhino rollers, scale bars, a GoPro Hero 10, as well as an inclinometer, compass, and Garmin GPS unit. I have a full list, if anybody's super interested, in my appendix of my paper, if you really want to read it. Again, I apologize because there's going to be a lack of photos in this presentation of the vessel itself as a result of both camera malfunction, I think on day 1, and then a lack of cameras on day 2, and just poor visibility on the site. I do have one video of the stern, but it's mostly James Fowler's torso. I don't know if anybody really wants to see that, but it's mostly his torso. All right, so continuing with site introduction, and I'm going to run through with a quick site description as well. So the site 61 is really our only good clear photo of it is right here. So myself am right here, and Corey Van Hees is over here, and it's kind of delineated by these 2 buoys. So we've got this one over here, and this float over here is really our only clear photo of where the wreck kind of lays from the surface. And this site was previously documented by Shemet, but in terms of detail of his work in 1998, it's essentially nothing about the wreck itself. I think this is due to the fact that he did not undertake actual diving operations for this, and I think there's similar cases along with Corey's wreck as well, with just no data being actually able to be collected, at least anything in particular. So there's no information in terms of site identification, or excuse me, type identification, propulsion, or anything related to presence of strapping versus no strapping, as we see that's typical among other sites by Shemet. So the site is located in the southwest sector of the bay, and It's situated off the port side of the Ida S. Dow, and it's located off the starboard side. Or excuse me, the Ida S. Dow is located off the starboard side, and then Kasota is located with its stern situated against the bow of Site 61. And again, the site is entirely submerged at high tide, and during the periods that it was observed during the assessment, we really didn't see a lot of it at all, both at low and at high tide, I think just based on seasonal variation. And then we have a compass bearing as well on that with a bearing of 94.4 from the bow of that vessel. In terms of the environment of the vessel and of the bay itself, it's really flat and rocky in terms of the bottom around it. And we really don't have any presence of hydrilla or any vegetation specifically around that vessel itself. It might be different from vessels around it, but we really didn't see any big indications of flora or fauna there. All right, moving right through here into goal 1, which is evidence towards a huff type identification. So based on several features from Site 61, it does appear that to be of huff type design. Diagnostic features that I pulled out include the agreement and diagnostic measurements that we pulled off the spec manuals of huff type vessels. The hull shape, which was discussed already by Jim pretty thoroughly with the hard chine, evidence of propulsion, that being twin screwed, and evidence of the longitudinal central bulkhead that runs almost the entirety of the ship, as well as locations of both sounding pipes, bilge machinery boxes, and again, it's got very similar diagnostic features to North Bend. In terms of big sources that we pulled, or excuse me, that I pulled a lot of this information from, again, are these specification manuals, ship plans, Lewis Huff's work in 2009, as well as in 2013, and Schmet's work in 1999, as well as McKellar 1959. And this figure on our right, Jim also used this one as well, is the SS Kapanuka, which is pretty similar in shape to North Bend. I do have quite a lot of pictures of North Bend, but we don't have a lot in terms of Site 61 or any of the potential identities of Site 61. Okay, so going forward and looking at key diagnostic features that were present or found on the site. Again, I apologize for the lack of pictures, but you will get lots of plans and diagrams. So myself and the team kind of conducted our primary investigations on the port side. This is really just due to time. And some of the things that we encountered were both the bilge machinery that we cross-referenced with the plans provided during the field school, and looked at the bilge machinery and location of the bilge machinery found on North Bend, as well as on plans, and kind of cross-referenced that as an additional feature for Site 61, and the location of the central bulkhead. In addition to that, we also found that these sounding pipes were located pretty in line with the site plan, and they were intact on the port side. Excuse me. These sounding pipes also had running alongside them watertight pipes with intact pressure knobs, as we saw in Dorian's presentation. But rather than them being either found, knocked off, they were intact and present on the pipes themselves. There's also some very clear buildup and very intact buildup of both the aft and fore bulkheads. And then some of the very interesting things that were found on this site in particular were pedestals and pedestal locations really focused on the stern of the vessel. And I'm not aware of any additional pedestals found in any other huff types in the bay, which were really cool. Also, this image here is kind of representative of the hard chine and really the use of straight timbers that can be seen as a big diagnostic measurement of huff type vessels. So shape and similarities to North Bend. Really, the big focus for this slide is the images interlaid between the site plan that we created in the field school, as well as Site 61. They fit on top of each other pretty nicely. And that kind of just adds to the whole identity of this being a huff type vessel. So goal 2, vessel name, identification, and research. I'm going to move a little quickly through this one because it's kind of boring. A lot of spreadsheets. But really, primary methodology is lots of spreadsheets using both Huff, McKellar, and Schmet's. And this is really just tracking depth, disposition, types, and location. And then additional resources such as aerial footage are also included within the analysis. So This is all maps that we've seen previously before. This is the 1929, 1936, and this is also a 1936 map. Between 1929 and 1936, you have the arrival of 8 unidentified vessels, Site 61 being one of those. And that appears right down here as Army number 154. And that is also pictured right here as well. This is really just some historical background. On your left here, that very small picture is of the James River. Those are of different vessels owned by Western Marine and Salvage, rafted up on the James River. This is before they're being taken to either Widewater or Mallows to be scrapped. And then you also have a shot from that video that we just saw from Dr. Richards. Potentially this guy being Site 61, but really who's to say based on that image. But what is kind of diagnostic is the buffer or the barrier here that kind of outlines the bay or the enclosure. Okay, so now the boring vessel name potential suggestions. So these are all the Huff type vessels present in 1936. I also started with a additional list of all 35 vessels that were present, or excuse me, all 35 Huff type vessels that were actually put into service and created. And these are the ones present in 1936. The Site 61 is not actually present within the bay at that time. It arrives in between that period it is present in 1936. It's not present in 1929. And then between those periods of 1936 to 2024, we do have some changes within the bay with Huff type numbers specifically. So specifically in 1952, we have Blandon no longer being present. And then in 2024, we have Astoria, Blandon, and Boylston no longer being present. But potentially, maybe with Jim's identification, Boylston is actually present within the bay. Okay, so last thing here is the actual possible identities of Site 61. So essentially, this is a tier list created based on the use of Schmidt, Huff, and McKellar of likely candidates. Macanda was my top candidate for this because it's the only one that all three agree on of it is present within the Potomac River, and it is unknown in terms of where it went after that. It is listed as burned, but all three agree that it was at least present within the Potomac River and not at Widewater. In terms of the second tier, it is Kalu and Baylet. There is disagreement between the three sources of where these ended up, which is why it's tier 2. And then the third tier is really just agreement in terms of vessels that were listed at Widewater, just with the distance between the two, between Widewater and Mallows. It's not without the realm of possibility that they could move between one or the other. And then the fourth tier are really just Huff type vessels owned by Western Marine and Salvage that have no location. Okay, conclusions. I'll end it very quickly because I know I'm over time. Really goals. Oh, I got a minute. I got plenty of time. Goals, typology and design identification. Site 61 is of a Huff type design setup. Goal 2, vessels in terms of the name and identification. My first likely candidate is Macanda, but really more research is warranted to try to really kind of prove this, or at least add more additional evidence towards either Macanda or another Huff type within the bay or not in the bay. Additional research is warranted, however, because the preservation of Site 61 is really quite surprising. There is 8 feet of depth of vessel actually present, and it's very, very surprising in comparison to other Huff type sites within the bay, including North Bend, and I think we also looked at Kasota. There's a lot of differences in terms of the progress of salvage between the two. Site 61 was much more intact. So I would say Site 61 is well worth going back to just to look at the intactness and construction styles of the design type, because there's very few Huff type examples available. Last thing here, acknowledgements, and that's all we got. Thank you guys so much.
The sounding pipes. I remember when you and I dove on the freeway, Either, I know I remember feeling something, was that what we were feeling along the middle, and how big, how, you know how thick they are?
So actually, on our plans, we have the spout standing pipe, which is what we felt here, and they are much thicker than the sounding pipes that we see a little bit more forward on the vessel. In terms of like hand size, the sounding pipes were much thinner, so they're like this, and the standing pipes we felt were like this, and they were those curved pipes that kind of like went like this. And I can show you a picture if you want of the stuff we found like that.
You wish you would have chosen this as your thesis over the.
I really can't say either way because we really wouldn't have been able to get a firm identity on this. And it was really just based on aerial footage. So I feel like it would be kind of a risk to be like, yeah, whole field school, aerial footage, maybe a hot tag. I spent a long time looking for plans, man.
What was the depth of it and like what kind of visibility did you have?
In terms of depths, it was 9 feet at the highest. Visibility on the outside of the vessel was good. On the inside of the vessel, the bottom disposition was really silty. So as soon as we kicked anything up, we really couldn't see a lot. But there was really a surprising lack of any deposits in there besides just probably 3 inches of silt, which is the only reason why we could see the sounding pipes at all.
The bow area was worse.
Yeah, the bow area is worse. There's also a very large hole on the starboard side of the vessel on the bow of that. But the guess, or at least the running theory, is that's present in a lot of vessels in Mallows, and it's probably due to scrapping.
Yeah, it's definitely a pattern, right? They break up the bow. Seems like they want to let the water in. Well, we've just seen the footage of the fire, but it seems like if they're going to be doing a lot of damage, they're demolishing one section of the bow because A was the same, north end's the same.
Yeah.
There's more weight in the stone.
I will answer your question.
Yeah.
So the bow's gonna be lighter.
Have you had any research in this that complemented your thesis research? If you're able to use any of this data in your thesis or vice versa, even.
It's darn too
I mean, in terms of this
I don't
process, it does kind of give a lot of credence to a lot of it being like actual sea transforms and salvage action rather than it being environmental.
Okay, awesome. Please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Don Swanbeck. Thanks for being here. I have the distinct honor of sharing not only a first name, but all 3 initials with Shamet.
It's pretty intimidating, right?
They didn't. And my presentation is on the concrete wreck, a nickname created by Chevette for Site 24 of the Mallows Bay Graveyard. Here we have aerial footage from 2024 of the site, just to give you a sense of where it's located in the bay. It's not far from Jim's wreck, Site 1, just immediately to the west, and Dorian's, I think, Site 4 is just beyond that, further west. So this is a clearer image from 2007, just to give you a bit more of the shape and layout of the site from a closer angle there. It's located at the northeast end of Mallows Bay, stern to stem orientation approximately 66 degrees. And we've got some just standard measurements there just to give you an idea of what this is. It's resting on its keel. It's exposed, it's filled with soil and very densely overgrown. This picture actually, I don't know if this was taken during winter, but it doesn't, the 2024 image gives a much better idea of at least the condition that we found it in this past fall. Just something of the site history. Thank you, Dr. Richards, for helping to get these satellite images from the USGS. Shamet had been able to determine that this wreck appeared in its current location between 1952 and when he began his survey in 1986, so about 3 decades. Now it's been ruled down to an 8-year period based on these images between 1952 and it appeared by 1960. Problem, okay, is that of course it remains unidentified. We need to get at the type of shipwreck, specific identity. Maybe can we get a vessel or vessels that it can correspond to? The project is broken down into 4 stages, alternating archaeological and historical methodologies. The stage 1 is the preliminary survey, where we got out to the site. We became acquainted to it. We got as much of the sort of general diagnostic data, filled out on the same pro forma that I think Ian mentioned. Stage 2 was investigating that data. Can we determine the vessel design based on that? Just a little spoiler, no, not exactly. So we had to try and narrow the field of inquiry and determine diagnostic features that we could look at to investigate in stage 3, where we go out to the site again. We perform a targeted investigation of very specific elements of the wreck, get as much observational and measurement data as we can from that. We also, work to better document the site. And then finally, stage 4, once all the archaeological work was done, come back and try and sift through the data, perform analysis, do historical research to try and see, can we determine the type? Can we narrow it down to a specific? Stage 1. Okay, this gives you, sorry for the quality of some of these images here. This gives a sense of the wreck. I think it's from the aft starboard quarter, and just how much of a jungle it was. At least it was, on that side. Even getting into the wreck was a little doubtful at first, but we managed. Here's a general mud map. It's going to, I wish we could come back to this easily during the presentation here, but it will give you a sense of some of the major features on the site. And we basically began from the stern and just worked our way forward during the stage 1 survey, documenting the features that were that stood out, that were of most particular interest for further investigation. Beginning at the stern, it's a little difficult to see from the image, but right down in the foreground of the picture on your left, we've got a submerged gudgeon assembly, and we also had the stern post intact. Right there, we were able to investigate that. And then here, immediately forward of that, are the feature that gives this wreck its name. We've got some very prominent stepped concrete frames. No shaft tunnel is in evidence here, but these were clearly prefabricated for this wreck. They were intentionally made for this ship, not poured in later, and they're reinforced with steel piping. Then we came across a peculiar feature that probably gave us more doubt than it really deserves, at least initially. In the initial survey, I'm combining a little information because we added to this when we went back to the wreck. We initially found 3 of these weird ladder features sticking up that, as far as we know, had not been observed on other wrecks. And this, of course, was cause for some puzzlement. Later on, we added at least 2 more to it, possibly one after that, though I wasn't able to see it for myself and confirm it. But all of these features were of same dimensions. They're parallel, equidistant from the keel, and there's no signs of breaking or cutting, which eventually led us to the idea, okay, these are clearly not ladders, these are probable stanchion supports, but it's still interesting. We also have prevalent keels and fasteners, like many of the wrecks that we were dealing with. Mine at least changed somewhat in both layout and in their form as we proceeded forward. Toward the stern, we had some sort of atypical grooved and hexagon-headed fasteners right there. And then as we moved forward, we had the engine block where we had a nice big array of those. I think Dorian, you saw, on your wreck, and maybe some of the others did too, marking that engine bed. And then prevalent moving forward from that are the round flat-headed variety that you can see here. in a pattern of longer fasteners toward the center, and then interspersed among them, there are some shorter ones, and you can see them out there extending slightly to port and starboard. And then as we approach the stem of the vessel, they actually sloped upward abruptly and angled back, marking that stem assembly. And then we have this, again, apologies for the imagery here, but there's a rudder assembly, but it's at the bow, which is very strange. It is, this sort of massive iron banded rudder protruding from the starboard bow. And it's been there for some time, as far as I can tell. Whether it belongs to this wreck, which does not have its rudder, or to another is uncertain, but it certainly is strange. Other notable features. This was just our base camp close to Jim's wreck. Girder keelsons. We certainly found a long longitudinal timber, but is this just a bulkhead or is it a girder keelson? Probably a girder keelson, but we had not, sort of conclusively said, oh, okay, that's a girder keelson. Bulkhead remains. We noted them around the midship area where to starboard and moving forward, the wreck site began to become more flooded, but they were there, definitely hazardous. Stepping on fasteners in shallow water is not fun. And the stem assembly, those sloping angled fasteners I mentioned, and we have an exposed keel and metal keel shoe at the extreme forward portion, indicating just how low in the wreck that we actually are. Stage 2, back from the field, what is the vessel design? We had certainly taken information on the performa, and a lot of that seemed to match up with the ferrous, allowing for decay, weathering, but there were a few discrepancies. So that it wasn't, whether that's due to, again, whether, some sort of weathering event or to human error, not sure, but it wasn't enough for me to sort of conclusively say this is a ferrous, particularly in light of some of the strange features that we observed on the wreck itself. So we, I ruled out the competition here. Beginning it's single screw, so it excludes all the twin screws. Oh, geez, 5 minutes. Basically, we were able to, by process of elimination, we were able to rule out, I don't think Continental's on there, but that was ruled out as well. And we got it down to ferrous or peninsula, which are of very similar dimensions. During this stage, I narrowed it down to 5 diagnostic features looking at the plans. The stern curvature appeared to differ between ferrous and peninsula. Sorry. Girder keelsons, that seems to be a difference. The number of sister keelsons also appeared to be a difference. Longitudinal metal reinforcements appeared only on peninsulas, not on ferrous, and the coal bunker layout seemed to differ as well. So stage 3, we went back to the field, and I'm going to breeze through this here as we investigated the site and looked at those features. You can see we're bringing along a probe to look for the metal reinforcements. And here's just some images that we took while out during this field for further documentation. We also noted some flora. If you look to the flowers on the right give you a sense that this is just a beautiful garden. The picture on the left gives you a sense of what it was actually like traipsing through the ocean. Okay, bushwhacking our way forward through adventurer style. So ferrous or peninsula, going through these things. One thought is stern curvature. As you can see in the top drawing, ferrous diagrams seem to indicate a convex stern, whereas peninsula hold has a concave or sort of sinusoidal structure. Looking at satellite imagery, because we were not able to address this idea came up rather late in the game, so we actually weren't able to take measurements out in the field from this. But from satellite imagery, slightly concave, sort of looks like that. Okay, so I mean that it's like, oh, could this be a peninsula? But wait, one, it's difficult to determine from satellite imagery alone, and 2, I went back and looked at other ferrous and peninsula vessels that have been confirmed as such in the field, and it's inconsistent. Not only do the plans maybe not necessarily match up in the in the line they're taking. But some Ferris types like Iowa show that, concave sinusoidal variety. I think Rec 4 does as well. It's a Ferris, and peninsula types like Brayburn, at least one shows that that convex curvature. So inconclusive on that step. Girder Keelsons, very quickly, Girder Keelsons present on Ferris, not present on peninsula, present on this one. Okay, strong indication that this is a Ferris. Theoretically, they could have been, I mean, we know that alterations were made to these ships as they were being built. Theoretically, a peninsula could have had these maybe added in. Is that likely? Tough to tell. But for now, it's concluded that this is pretty strong Ferris evidence. Sister Keelsons. Ferris appeared, at least at first glance, to have only one pair of sister keelsons in that sort of layout of the longitudinal reinforcement. And it's tough to see, but Peninsula looked like it had two. And, maybe to compensate for the lack of those keelsons. Now, the shorter fasteners to the sides were suggestive of two sister keelsons. But wait, going back in the records, as we looked along here, it looks like the layout of these are both from Ferris, for instance, and you can see that the layout of the longitudinal reinforcements actually changes over time, throughout the vessel. So basically, this is not necessarily a valid point of inquiry here. So indeterminate. I know I'm over time. Sorry. Diagnostic 4, metal reinforcements. Okay, from the Peninsula spec manuals, there are iron girders that are there that theoretically we might be able to detect from probing. It seems difficult to imagine that they could be salvaged, the entire vessel without a trace that low. Possible? Maybe, but unlikely, I think. Ferris plans, they're absent. Peninsula plans, they're there. Systematic probing revealed no evidence of iron girders. Was there a change to plans? Was the iron potentially salvaged? I mean, we could look at peninsula vessels that have been confirmed in the bay and dive down there and just check to see if it's actually there. But for now, it's believed that this constitutes strong evidence for Ferris. And finally, the coal bunker layout. You've got the Ferris with these long longitudinal bunkers, two of them, and the Peninsula has these truncated ones and a long transverse one down the center there. The survey was incomplete here. We were running out of time, but this is sort of a little mud map of what I was doing there. And basically, this could correspond to either. It's indeterminate at the moment as to whether this fits one or the other there, but we could go back and take a look and perhaps find a closer match. So specific vessel identification. The bulk of the energy and time was spent on just breaking down, getting the design, but still some sources were consulted to try and at least come up with a list of possible specific identities. So assuming that this is a Ferris, and I think that there's strong evidence that there is, we can at least definitively narrow it down to one of 64 known Ferris vessels, assuming that it's one that was originally in the bay, as Jemet says. Of these four candidates, of these four candidates were not documented as burned. I at least found, or observed no evidence of burning on my wreck. Was there burning? Tough to tell for this. But hypothetically, if we went back and did a closer look and found that there was no burning, that coupled with the narrow window during which this wreck appeared and the particular site formation, possibly Abbeville, Latoka, Pascagoula, or Toka, possibly. If not one of those, that much larger 64 list. We need further investigation to determine. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. How much of the vessel was concrete? There were the steps, concrete frames at the stern, and there was concrete at the bow to probably counterbalance that out. But, yeah.
Yeah, Don, I think that you had a challenge that your wreck is so much more deteriorated. It's so much, as intact as Ian's is, yours is the opposite. It's so low. And so, you know, you're looking at fasteners to infer where wood once was is the only way forward. And then we threw for a loop with the peninsula thing, you know, and we've got the benefit of all Allison's research with the ferrous type. And we bring that to the field school. We know so much about it because of her research. And now we have Ian's, but we have nothing on the peninsula. And so the very little that we have, you know, they could be red herrings. I think you and I talked about the fact that probably the drawings are taken from different perspectives. And so the stern curvature may be a way for us to be misdirected.
Right.
Yeah. And so I still think that you've got really quite good evidence for a ferrous type. But yeah, good job on dealing with what you had to work with.
So I'm intrigued by the ladders, which were not ladders, but stanchions.
So supports, yes.
So
Like
just
locking those.
And midship, starboard, port.
Those occurred, they ran forward, starting in the aft section, running forward to midships, offset by a couple meters, but parallel to the keel.
And anything in the historical record that indicates that that's.
Not as far, not so far in the research. I mean, in the back of my mind, theoretically, I mean, is it possible to come across something, you know, some document of those being added into the ship? I would want to confirm, first of all, that they indeed are unique. Oops, sorry. That they are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Do you know, are there any others of those?
Yeah, so when you look at the ferrous plans, there are stanchions on the girder keelsons, and they seem to be reinforced with wooden knees, not with iron, like these iron sort of like staples and brackets. But this is also on Corey's. I mean, they're still in, but Corey, you had interesting features on yours too. But the notion of like these hurried vessels being defective and maybe the installation of the wrong timber, or like maybe they went back and they had to reinforce. You know, I think. It's a hypothesis. There's no historical evidence of it at all, but it's on a vessel that seems to be ferrous. So what other conclusions can we come to? We'll have to see, like, if something else develops, but it's a variation for sure.
Was there evidence of a rudder being broken off of it anywhere, or like damage from where that rudder?
Good question.
Came from? No.
Not so far as I observed for that. I mean, it's just missing on mine at the end there. I mean, the gudgeon's present, obviously. You know, could it have fit to it?
They broke it off now.
Well, I would assume that it would be from like a high energy event. If it was there, if it was something similar to Addison's, you know, and that hurricane came through at some point, you know, and broke it off and washed it in between those wrecks. Theoretically, it's a pretty massive timber, so it would have to be. You know, but then again, we're talking about ships that were burned down to the waterline, floating away and being dragged back, you know, so.
Yeah, there's another hypothesis I thought about, and that is that if you look at the video and you see all the activity on the shoreline, you also notice that all the barges are in that area by the shoreline. And we also know from Chamet's work that the infrastructure for pulling wreckage up onto the beach extended by wires from the hills, right? So it could just as likely be that a rudder was salvaged and slipped off a barge from any of the wrecks.
Right.
Or it could be that they were on the grabbing gear that was being pulled up and it slipped off and fell in the water.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's associated with it's still really great and you have to look at the evidence. But I mean, you couldn't even say that it's associated with the one next to it.
Right.
Or it could be the one, the supple baleen that's up on the shoreline. Yeah. So it's probably an accident, and then it's in the mud, and then they're like, we don't care, and they left it there.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Why this wreck was dragged all the way into that area, you know, sometime in the 50s, seems a little strange to me. Particularly, you know, like I mean, that it seems unusual that it was dragged up into shore that late in the game, but in its particular place. Is that a hint? No. Yes.
Due to your vicinity of the shore, when you were conducting your research there, did you see that, did the fluctuation of the tides like interfere drastically with you retrieving your data, or was it pretty constant?
Drastically, I don't know about drastically, but it did definitely interfere toward the end there. You know, I was wading through rising water, taking probing, desperately trying to, within the time allotted, take measurements of bulkheads, you know, that were being inundated. So yeah, I mean, Shamet notes that it's dry. I don't know if, you know, how detailed he was with regard to it. It's dry mostly, but that forward, starboard side gets flooded. So.
Thank you. All right, so today I'm gonna talk to you guys about vessel number 60. It is right next to Ian's wreck, and I honestly think I spent almost more time on Ian's wreck thinking it was my wreck than being on my wreck.
Thank you for.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to give a little quick rundown of the project. We kind of know it by now, but unfortunately, we haven't had the nice fancy names that Dr. Richards labeled our groups. So this was part of our field school. We were all designated a shipwreck to adopt, and I was in the group of the deep sea divers, which was me, Ian, and Evan. And then you can see right there is a satellite image of the wreck, and I think that one's from 2007. So when we first initially went out, we thought that we could potentially do this on snorkel. After a few minutes, we realized that that was way harder, so we switched to scuba. Mine was the first wreck that we looked at when we did that first day of investigation. So there was a lot of trying to figure out where the shipwreck was. As it's sandwiched between two shipwrecks, you think that would be easy, but then you quickly lose it. We used, like I said, snorkel, scuba, GPS, compass, and then slates and proformas. These nice drawings are actually not done by myself. I'm not artistic. This was from Jim, and these are some of the weird things that we found, and I'll kind of talk about them in a few minutes. But there's this like sea channel that runs along the keelson that you almost impale yourself on. And then I think this is something Evan may have potentially found the first time, but I don't know because I didn't see this. I felt it. Most of the things on this wreck I didn't see. I felt. And it felt more like a half circle, but this is something we might be considering as a bearing or a bushing. So day one was kind of a chaotic morning for us. It took us probably an hour or so to just locate my wreck, and we had minimal time per group. By the time we located it, we were stretching a tape to try to get the length overall from the beam, and we realized that that was not the bow of the ship. It was some other shipwreck. So we had to redo that again. Unfortunately, the tape measure was stuck underneath the fastener, so we had to slowly reel it through the fastener of 225 feet, stretched out and tangled up. So that was kind of like the first day of our investigation. We really didn't get that much data. I think I got a couple measurements at the end. When Dr. Richard showed up, he pointed out that there was a shaft log, and that was kind of the main focus of the day. Day two came, and luckily day two came because originally there wasn't supposed to be a day two, but Dr. Richards and Dr. Harris were very nice to us and gave us a second day. I came with a better strategy this time. I had a list of, and this is kind of like part of the limitations of my study. I had created a list of projects or areas that each group should do. So the second day there was Jim Fowler and myself. We were on the dive team. Going through and doing some of the deeper stuff. And then Addison Costa and Dr. Richards were on a snorkel team trying to do some of the diagnostic work on the sides of the hull, the stern, and the bow, as well as getting GPS and compass bearings. So the first day, the weather conditions were not favorable in the morning. It's probably some of the bigger waves we experienced, especially while diving. Their visibility was probably a foot. And it was overcast, so it was kind of hard to see just in general, as well as with the wave motion. And that may have added to some of the complication of locating the wreck, as well as continuing to locate the wreck once we found it. Measurements. Scientifically, archaeologists use metric system. The proformas we used were in inches. So I ended up getting a mix of measurements, not only, probably mostly from myself, because in the moment, I didn't realize that I was recording differently, but so I had to kind of go through and figure out if the measurements were in inches or centimeters. So some of my measurements are not totally accurate and kind of disregarded. I mentioned the visibility and then of course locating and continuously delineating the wreck. Oh, on the second day, we buoyed the sterns of the wreck to make sure that we could find them. One of the buoys was floating right as we pulled up. We thought it was Ian's. So I spent about a half hour on Ian's stern recording it. until Ian poked me and was like, "This is my wreck. Your buoy got untied." So once again, this wreck was kind of a fun time. I didn't want to cover this too much because I figured most everybody knows about these, but I just wanted to include it briefly. The U.S. Shipping Board during World War I was created, and then they created the they contracted / created the Emergency Fleet Corporation that was in charge of creating all these vessels that ended up at Mallows, or most of them. So the historical methodology, Chemet really liked hull number 153, which is also the designation my vessel had received on the 1936 map. You can see it right here. He notes that it does not move from that location from its time of deposition in 1936, and it does not exist with the 152 vessels that were noted in 1929. He notes that Chemet notes that the 153 is the first one to have an additional number to be added. So instead of saying it's something else, it's the first one that actually adds a number to the roster. I thought that was important. Hull 53 also does move, unlike Chemet, but it gets moved back. It ends up breaking free, floating down the river, sometime in between 1936 and 1945. I think it was 1937. A captain named by Reed, he ends up almost running into it. He tows it to the shore across onto the Virginia side, and it ends up at W.B. Lee's house, which is just south of the Whitewater anchorage, where they also did some wrecking and salvage. Here it is noted that W. Lee's son is currently scrapping it while it's right off their property. And then eventually it is moved back into its location. You can see says 153 and it says at Lee's, Virginia shore. So once they move it back, it is then all these vessels that are on the leeward side or on the riverward side, they ended up getting covered with a whole bunch of mud from dredges in order to create some sort of dike system. And I think that was in 1938, 39. So the vessel is replaced before that 1945. So then I'm gonna go back real quick. I kind of went through the majority of the vessels from like 134 to 130 and down and tried to see what was there in 1929 and what wasn't there in the 1936. Sorry. So then I ended up chasing down a lot of names, 24 to be exact. Some of which Iowa was noted. We knew that existed, and I'm not going to cover this too much because I don't know, 8 of them end up getting discarded because they are destroyed in 2 separate burning events. And then some of them I find out are of different types. There's Ferris, Huff, Peninsula, which later on I will tell you why I eliminate some of them. So hopefully this video works, but I'm not sure. Oh, it does. So this is the bow. This is a fastener. The main part of the bow that I want you to see is that there's the stem iron. The stem iron is in 2 pieces actually like butted up next to each other, which is weird and unique to the site because prior to this, I think we have only noted that there were like single pieces. This is Jim's video. So this is the stem right here. And then it will be dropping down into the stem iron here shortly. I've tried to capture stills, but the video is the only thing that does it justice because of the visibility. So this is the stem iron here. It has evidence of oxyacetylene cuts, which may be from W.B. Lee's son, or it may be from the salvers that were operating during like the Great Depression, World War II. Once we get past this, so Jim's going to drop down here, and you're going to see the other piece of the stem iron to the right on the port side. If you'll zoom out here quickly, so you can see there's one piece and another piece. And there's a little gap, so that was a really interesting feature that we noted, and I don't think we've, like I said, saw it anywhere else. And I am gonna skip because I'm running out of time. This is at the bow. The only thing that shows from the surface are these couple of fasteners and then this concrete frame. Just aft of this concrete frame, there's also more concrete frames or fillers. There's also this little bulkhead. I think that's what it would be, like a 4 bulkhead. The apron's present. There's some hull planking. And I think that's about it for the bow. And then that was compared to the AOA plan. These are the stills. Like I said, I think the video did better justice. So then the stern, there's not much of the stern that's deteriorated. You're going to see me light up where the stern post would have been. All that exists is just hull planking. So these are actually hull planking with the light behind it, trying to show that you could literally walk in or swim into there until you get to the shaft log, which there's only about half of the shaft log that exists. But this video shows, this was like 10 minutes later from the bow video, how different it is when you come to the river side, the river, I don't know, channel work side of the wreck. At the very end here, you're gonna see it's gonna get dark, but I'm trying to highlight a piece of metal. At least it was debated between me and Jim whether it was metal or not. And unfortunately, we never had Dr. Richards verify, but if it is metal, I think it's part of this rudder assembly, where it would be like the steel knees or the side plate, but it's within like an arm's reach of the stern. So like you feel into the darkness, and then it's this. It looks like it's cut also right here with oxyacetylene. I was squeezing the top right here to see if it was brittle, and it was rock hard, so I don't think it's wood. Jim said he scraped it with his flashlight, and I think he got off of it was just like crustacean. Yeah. Also, the only fauna that we really saw was one crab, one little blue crab. All right, so I do believe, and I'll get to this later, that it's a ferrous, and these are the reasons why. This is what I was talking about right here. This is that little metal piece in that last video where you can't really see anything. So the shaft tunnel or the shaft log was present. It was only the bottom half. And then everything up above here is gone, except for some of the hull planking. None of this exists as well. This is completely gone. And then you drop down into here and you get what would be the shaft tunnel escape. And then it would lead to where the shaft tunnel would be. The shaft tunnel is probably buried underneath that sediment that was put on it during that period it became part of the dike. But the stern's fascinating because there's really not much to it anymore. And then the shaft log also had metal banding on the inside that we noted. So this is just showing the shaft tunnel where it connects, as well as the shaft tunnel escape on a ferrous. Midships, I think the thing that really sold it for me was the amount of the lineup of the bulkheads. So this is Iowa, and then this middle here, I forgot to put an arrow on it. You can kind of see there's a bulkhead running across, and we ran into another one forward. As well as I swam through this coal bunker, and it was fairly intact, and Dr. Richards noted a coal bunker right here. So it kind of helped give away that this is probably a ferrous. It's also, its length overall is pretty similar to that of the ferrous's length of the keel. It's about 7 feet shorter, which may be accounted for that stern post being missing. The beam is estimated because the side of the hull actually like stopped existing. We kind of estimated there's just a little bit poking out. So there's kind of a hole in the side of the hull on the port or starboard side. There's also cross strapping, and then as noted, the C channel. The C channel was just, we didn't see that anywhere else. At least I don't think anyone else had C channel on their wreck. So we don't know why that's there. We're thinking maybe as some sort of support. And then I kind of mentioned that. And then this is actually one of the vessels I think it could potentially be, which is cool. So in conclusion, Mallows Bay number 60 was identified as a ferrous type due to its measurements, the location of the bulkheads, the bow assembly, as well as the I can't think of what it's called right now. The bulkheads, the coal bunkers. There we go. A name has not been identified, but I was able to, out of 24 of those vessels, figure out where some of those vessels were destroyed in Maryland or in Virginia. Some of them still exist where they were destroyed, about 5 of them too, as well as limit which ones weren't ferrous types. So out of the ferrous types that I had left was acetin, which was that picture I just showed you. Bagosa or Bagoso, there's multiple spelling errors of vessels. Balota, Bonifin, which is different than I think yours, which is Bonifin with an I, right? Because there's 2 of them. Someone was talking about Bonifin. Yeah. Funduko, Nashatoa, and I don't know how to say that one name, Nyanda. I also think it could be, there was one unnamed ferrous that was mentioned in Robert's database of pretty much all the EFC vessels. And it is the only one that is unnamed that mentions not assigned one ship, where all the other ones say not built or canceled. So that means that there may be an unnamed ferrous ship that ended up here. And it may not be any of these. It could be something from the original great 1920s tie-up at the original mothball fleet location in Clarendon, Virginia. I think Ian was talking about that. So I'm not totally sure if it is one of these vessels that was existing in 1929 and disappeared after that. These ones were all known to be across at wide water and Brent's Marsh, which was W.B. Lee's kind of location. Other than that, special thanks to everyone that helped me with the project, as well as just everyone making field school a great experience. Noah, the sanctuary, and then Maryland's Historic Trust. I'm sorry if I missed anyone else. But that is it.
So, I mean, just for other people's reference, I had to leave field school a little bit early, and so I wasn't there when all of this was happening. And I remember, like, even for me looking at my wreck, which was, fairly high and dry, really intact. I had that like one day to look at it, and I was the first person to go, and I didn't really know what was going on. So I just wanted to say that I'm impressed by everything that you were able to get like on your second day after you like encountered so many issues on your first day. I think it shows like really good planning, and I was wondering, how did you sort of prioritize what to do in such a difficult situation?
So I will say the first day I definitely was, I just wasn't in like the right headspace, I think. I got in the water and I felt like a baby that had never swam. And I kind of looked at Evan. I think Evan remembers. He's like, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing either. So I'm like, great, let's do this. Ian
kind of felt like that. We were like, oh my goodness.
Not to mention Dr. Richards and Allison kind of threw us to the wolves, and they went to AOS, and that was
Who's throwing food at the wolves, right?
And we're like, Mark, can you help us? And Mark's like, I don't know what's going on, man. So Mark tried, but it was very chaotic that first little bit. The second day, I realized what all the measurements that I did not get that everyone else had from their wrecks. And I was like, all right, I need to get this. And some of these are going to have to be done with diving. And other of these are like kind of more like things that are important, but like I could have other people do. I think the only thing I would change is maybe have myself take the video footage, because out of those 2 minutes you watch, that's about all I have of a half hour. Otherwise, it's mostly just Jim's body, as noted by Ian. And yeah, other than that, I don't know. Even when I was writing this, I didn't feel confident. It was the fact that Hull 153 was such a big deal to Chemet, that it had its own history, allowed me to get those leads and like really hone in on what it could be besides the aerials. I think without the aerials, I probably wouldn't know, because for the most part, it was like an abyss down there. I did not see things except for the coal bunker. That was the coolest probably experience I had in field school, swimming through that. It was really cool. Because at that moment, I was like, I don't know what I'm in. And then I was like, this is a coal bunker. And it just like light bulb. And I was like, I finally get something, because like I'm looking at the night heads and I'm like, I don't know what this is, or the apron. I don't know what this is, I got the coal bunker though.
Being that you guys were on the deep sea divers team, more towards channel and deeper. So I have two questions. So what was the flow of water like through there? And two, how much sediment do you think was actually inside the hull of the vessel?
So I'll answer the second question first, because that one I have on the top of my head. So I think after reading that they put like dredge spoils in there, you can see the difference in the sediment outside and inside. The sediment inside is almost like this orange rusty mud, and the outside sediment's kind of like that loamy-ish kind of mud that you see that's like grayish black. But there's also like random bits of pebbles and like shells. So like, I don't know, there's parts where you're like, oh, there's some things. And then there's parts where you're like, I don't know if I'm in the wreck anymore, because it's kind of like the moon, or like more so Mars because it's red. But, and then the flow of water, it definitely, I think, was more active. And especially that first day when we started, it was that morning was a little bit rougher than the afternoon. I wish I had the actual weather data. I did not record it that day, but from my best guess, we probably had some waves that were white capping a little bit coming in, and they were coming from the northwest. So they were pushing into the wreck towards the shore. And it just made things really difficult because there wasn't much blocking it compared to the other wrecks that are more inside. So yeah, and then I think the second day, I don't know if the waves changed direction, but it wasn't as bad. It was just that the visibility got worse as you progressed down the vessel towards the stern. As you saw in those videos, you got that like nice little bit where you can actually see the lake here to the table, and then you get to where I'm down trying to find that little thing I was trying to highlight, and it's nothing. You can't really see anything. Without a light, it's completely black.
Your semi, do you think it was cracked from salvage, or do you think it was actually made out of two pieces?
I'm not totally sure because it's cut. So like there's this part, and then it's like there's the other part down here, and there's almost like an even gap going down. So I feel like it was two different pieces, and I think Jim's engineering also thought it was a little bit of two pieces because he thought it was weird as well. And we kind of talked to Dr. Richards about it, and he said that it might be just like that it was getting built with at a time later where there was less supply.
Yeah, when you read the historical record, there's a fight over iron. In that while these are wooden ships, they still need to have so much iron. But the success of that period is the iron shipbuilding program, and they need the iron. So it makes me wonder whether there's not another cost-cutting measure or, corner cutting that's happening, and maybe that's why they did that. Because I think it's the same thing that Jim has. Like, why do you have what he calls the chine log, one chine log versus two, or why do you have to have a shaft log out of Doug fir that's bigger and yellow pine that's smaller? It's because it's a supply issue. And so you think you're seeing that sort of thing popping up.
Also, you made me realize earlier when you guys were talking about the Doug fir, yellow fir, that's probably a Doug fir one because that shaft log probably was one piece.
Oh, yeah. We only just talked about that the other day, so.
Unless it wasn't because of the metal banding, I don't know.
I hadn't talked to you about that. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Is that metal banding in them?
Yeah, it was like it followed the curve, and it was about 60 centimeters, I think, from the interior of like the curve.
You need some sort of gland in there, right? Waterproofing gland to stop water intrusion into the shaft box. So you wouldn't just have wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was on like pretty much right at the end of it.
Yeah.
I don't think it extended too far into like going out of the wreck, towards the rudder post or stern post.
On that plan, you can see the cap on outside of the stern post, but if you don't have the stern post.
Yeah, and also because, propeller shaft cause vibrations
Mhm.
and leakage a lot of wood.
Yeah.
And so having the metal reinforce that.
And it might even help with like reducing friction.
Yeah.
That little like piece that Jim had drawn, he thought it was potentially a propeller bushing, but since I never physically actually saw it, I didn't research it.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, last but not least is Nate Wood. It's Nate Gold.
That's right.
And he will finish us up.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Nate Wood. I will be giving the last presentation on this glorious day. I have Mallows Bay site number 20. I have decided to name it the Jungle Wreck. As you could probably guess by the name, it is the last of the flower pot wrecks. And was probably, in my opinion, one of the thicker ones aspects of it. Don's, I would say it was probably on par with how Don's was. And y'all see that. So without further ado, let's take a run through the jungle. The site location. So in Mallows Bay, the site is located on the northeast side of the bay, kind of hugging the side of the coast. It's hugging the side of the bay where the beach is. And it's kind of in a position with numbers 19 and 20, where they form almost like a triangle. And so number 20 is on the south part of the triangle, and it kind of creates a barrier to protecting number 19, which is it's one of the supple balans. And so it's where it's positions that it kind of protects that one, but it's like the whole starboard side of number 20 due just to constantly getting hit by waves from marine traffic out in the Potomac, has kind of heavily degraded on the starboard side. And we'll get a little bit more into that as well. Another interesting part of it is a good part of the stern's actually under number 21. So kind of hard time getting to that. And so I've kind of had to use a lot of shoemates notes on it. And it's about 200 from what he approximated and what we kind of got. It's about 265 feet ish. And so, and it's facing a bearing at 1.1065. So it's like facing into the bay. Like most of the other ships in there where it's pulled in, but it forms that triangle, and in that triangle is kind of it's almost like a stagnant pond. There's just no wave action getting there, so it's almost like kind of like a methane pond too. So site number 20 was analyzed over the course of 2 visits, roughly 2 to 3 hours in length, on the 12th and 15th. So not a super big amount of time there, but it was enough to kind of get a quick survey of the site. So the first team was Don, Armani, Dr. Richards, and I. And then the second time, it was Armani, Evan, Dr. Richards, and I. And so we went in, and I got sick the first day. So that's kind of why I got cut off for the first day. And then Dr. Richards was kind enough to let me go back on the 15th. So the site description. So site number 20 is heavily degraded and heavily vegetated. Very little of the vessel's wooden structure remains, like very, very little. When you kind of step onto it, it's like just dirt. It's dirt and mud. There's not really any visible wood, like looking down. There's some on the sides. It's heavily degraded. There is some signs of fire. But there was a fire. The bigger indicator of that came later, kind of near these fasteners where we started finding a bunch of pieces of slag. From the molten metal. And so very little of the wood structure remains. Some of the cross strapping is more visible than others. On the starboard side, there's not a whole lot. You kind of have to get closer. It's in really bad shape. There's more on the port side. It's also not in great shape, but there's a lot more than on the starboard, which kind of really hits that the starboard's just been kind of getting hit by that way. I think it's just been kind of bringing it down over time. This is kind of expediting its degradation. And so there's an abundance of metal fasteners of different types and in various stages of degradation on this vessel. As you can see here, there's one this is threaded and has actually 2 nuts on it. There was some like that. There's another one there and there. And you can kind of see in the middle where it was, and they've kind of eroded together. And there's some flatheads there in the back, fasteners as well. We went into this one section and there was like a small, like a sea of fasteners. Fasteners. Is this the engine bed? Man, this is a huge engine bed. And I was like, oh man, I got like the supercharged EFC vessel. You know, this thing's like moving, right? No, that was a mistake. The more we looked at it, we went back the second day, we kind of realized that it's just very, very heavily degraded. The fasteners are kind of one of the bigger things that are left that are apparent there. And so we site analysis through strong degradation. The site is difficult to identify from first inspection. If I were to give my estimate on what this is, which is very hard to say, I would say probably a Ferris, just in like kind of the lengths match up decently well. Where the engine bed, where we believe the engine bed was, it matches up to what we think is a Ferris. But there was very little material remains on this vessel when it comes to timbers and stuff. And you can see here too, there's actually a pipe. There's a pipe, elbow pipe there. And then there's a piece of like a tree root that's growing through where the pipe would have gone and actually goes under the tree and back out the other side. And it's just, there's 3 persimmon trees, and we'll get to that in a little bit on this one, in a couple slides. So material culture, although the site was heavily degraded, material culture was evident. We found that a lot more on the second day. Kind of just walking around, we started finding the hexagonal white tile that's been talked about a lot. So I found a bunch of those. And then we found this kind of square piece of tile that has these little kind of like, I guess, diamond-like shapes in them. It's kind of how I would describe it. We only found a couple of those, which I thought was kind of odd. There was some writing on it, but it was very faint. Obviously, we didn't get to take any of this stuff with us to put under anything. So it was kind of like what we could make out of it at the time. And there was brick on this site as well. And the brick actually on this site, unlike the other sites, had Beaver written on it, which is the manufacturer. And funnily enough, foreshadowing for the next slide. So flora and fauna. So site 20 is overgrown with various species of fauna. There was 3 persimmon trees of various sizes kind of spread out on the wreck. The biggest one was on the bow. There was a blackberry bush, there was a vine of, I think there were wild peas. They look like pea pods is what I would guess. Various wildflowers and different kinds of animal scat. Um, so, I mean, this kind of wreck really, with the amount of vegetation on it, and I mean, we did the scat and stuff we saw and all like, it's kind of like a little biome on its own. It's not directly connected to land, which means that any of the animals, the raccoons, the beavers, the deer, that get on it are either going to have to get on 19 and try to walk across it and get that way, or they just swim across that little gap. But it is interesting because all of the plants that are growing there that have gotten there were there because an animal dropped them there. So it's all kind of like keeps it going. There's very little human interaction with that I could tell in there. There was a shotgun shell, and there's a lot of intrusive kind of modern material culture. I think kind of where this wreck 19 and 21 are in that corner. I think a lot of trash from upriver gets washed in there and then just gets stuck because there was like chip bags and water bottles and all kinds of stuff. And so, oh, look, there's another people. So despite heavy degradation of site and then limitations that accompany that, the vessel is possibly likely, I think, a Ferris type. Could be wrong. Heavily degraded, I would guess that. Little visible structure remains to be studied. There is a decent amount of material culture, and we would find material culture in kind of weird places. There would be like puddles almost in there, and they're kind of too big to be called a puddle. It was like they'd be like under a tree, be like a hollowed out section, be flooded, and we'd find chunks of that white tile that's still attached to the cement in it. We found that square tile too there. And then we also found a piece of white metal that was sticking up out of the ground. We think it could have been, we're not really sure what it was. I couldn't tell if it was intrusive. I didn't want to try to yank it out or anything. It looked like it almost could have been plastic, but I couldn't. It kind of had a weird bend to it. It was strange. And so we kind of looked at that pretty briefly, but it was mostly kind of material culture and kind of the ecology side of it is what I kind of really got out of this site. Site like most of Mallows Bay is at risk. I mean, it's right there on the Potomac. There's constantly, marine traffic. We watch them. Those boats don't slow down. They don't. So, so the starboard side is just going to keep degrading. What this site will look like in 50 to 100 years, who knows? It could be basically turned into kind of like a little island. This is what I'm kind of wondering is going to end up happening. Is this wreck is basically set like a kind of a groundwork. And it's been building up dirt and this, and foliage and stuff into a point where somebody might kayak past it one day and they're going to be like, that island there used to be a wreck, that's how we got started. And so that's kind of my thing on it. And that's it.
Questions for Dave?
I'm gonna ask probably the obvious question because I don't remember anybody else saying that they had any tiles like that, like the square ones that have designs on the back. Were you able to find any writing on those? I'm just sort of curious if they're the same.
There was some faint writing, but I couldn't really make out what it said. And it wasn't, I think it was different than the ones you have because it was a different shape and it wasn't as written out. It seemed like it was shorter, whatever it was.
Interesting. I was just curious if they might have been from the same company.
They could have been released or related.
They had tons of
It seemed shorter though. Whatever was written on there was pretty short. It was like, so it could have been that.
Yeah, we keep finding you was talking about the metal, and I think we keep finding this lead. And then when in the spec manual, they talk about lead associated with tiling to waterproof. I guess they're afraid of water penetration into the top floor to cause rot and whatever else, but they've lead flash or have an underlay of lead on some of these tiles. So it makes me wonder about your lead. Yeah. And then we found that big sheet of lead on the North Bend. And so it's interesting that we keep finding these things in association with one another all the time.
I think I said, yeah, lead. Yeah.
So I was like,
that's not the right metal. Yeah. All right. Yes.
Nate, out of all the wrecks I assessed, I remember your wreck having the most, not the U word, but the most fascinating fasteners.
Yeah, there was a wide variety.
You had a lot of different varieties that I only seen in your wreck. So do you think that those varieties are due to the erosions, to do your wreck being so eroded that it exposed all those different types of fasteners?
Oh yeah, and I think it did, and it does bring up more questions. Why did it have this variety of fasteners? I didn't see this on the wrecks I worked with y'all stuff.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like a big confusing point for me, is I was like, why does this one have these three different kinds? And also, which of these fasteners are eroded or have been damaged? That like the pointed ones, I was like, these could be pointed, or are they just broken? And that's just the way they kind of melted or whatever when they salvaged it. So that was a lot of lots of questions to be answered. Does anybody else have any questions? Speaking of questions?
All right, well, thank you, Nate. And with that, we are going to conclude today's long session. And thank everyone online. And hopefully we'll get to go back and do more research in the future. And thanks for your interest.